You know, I thought my dream of playing in the NFL was for sure over, but then I saw some of the names that James Gladstone pulled out of a hat on day 3 of the draft for the Jags, and I'm not so sure I won't hear my name called next year. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 15 team in my power rankings as we head into the 2026 NFL season, as today we'll be taking a deep dive into this year's Jacksonville Jaguars. I think this is a really fascinating narrative with this team because last year they shattered certainly my own and I think most people's expectations. They win 13 games last year and really in multiple different spots throughout the course of the season. Felt like a legitimate Super Bowl contender, and what was crazy is they did it really without much impact from Travis Hunter at all, right? One of the biggest storylines heading into the year was what he was as this generational two-way type of prospect in so many ways. Knowing how much the Jags invested in draft capital to go get him, the fact that they had as much success last year without really getting to tap into what Travis Hunter could bring to the table for this team this year and beyond is what highlights my intrigue for this year's Jacksonville Jaguars. But we obviously have so much to talk about with this team here today. As we get started, though, if you enjoy this deep dive series, if you enjoy today's video, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it's a free, quick, and easy thing that really does support this video and this series. Make sure you're subscribed as well so you don't miss any of these deep dives throughout our countdown to the number 1 team. And lastly, a big announcement here. The new TFG hat is here. It is on the market as of the posting of this video. My patrons and YouTube members already got first dibs on the supply last night. I have 90 of these on the market. So it's first come, first serve. That link is in the description below. Go get yourself a TFG hat, rep the brand, support the channel in that way. Really excited about how these turned out. Super nice quality. I think you guys are going to love them. So excited to announce that here today as well. But let's go ahead and get started. As always, we will go through every aspect of this football team. And as we go through all the different position groups and the coaching staff, we will begin each of those segments taking a look at their offseason changes and asking the big question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And we'll begin with the coaching staff, in which case Jags fans can celebrate that we get to see a big fat neutral here because both of their coordinators, Grant Udinski and Anthony Campanile, were in the head coaching search for other teams this year, and both of them return to Jacksonville for at least another year here. And obviously, like roster-wise, teams are always trying to get better, and this might not necessarily be the best roster the Jags will ever have, kind of in this next 5 years or whatever. But we do know that it's important to capitalize on these windows with staffs when everything clicks as well as things did for the Jags last year. When you have guys that are so well respected throughout the league and achieving what they're achieving here, and as we start to dive into this coaching staff, I think this is the biggest asset that the Jaguars have going for them right now. Not to say that there aren't exciting things going on with this roster, but man, Liam Cohen stepped in year 1 as a hire here and checked all of those boxes for the kind of prototype coach that so many teams are after. The young, ascending, offensive-minded coach in the Sean McVay tree. And Liam Cohen looks like he just might be next in line of these guys we talk so highly of. The Kevin O'Connell, Matt LaFleur, you name it. To me, Liam Cohen well on his way towards being locked in as a top 10 head coach in the NFL. And honestly, if you wanted to take that leap of faith with him and just say, I was so impressed by what he did last year that he's a top 10 head coach in the NFL for me, I wouldn't really fault you. I've got him 13th after 1 year heading into season 2, obviously. And there's just not that much more to say about the job that he did. He came into a Jags organization that has really struggled to find the right coach that can raise the bar in terms of locker room culture and create that winning mentality. And obviously with 13 wins, shocking the world in year 1. And even like throughout the course of the season, they got off to this hot start. Things were looking great. And then it looked like maybe they were going to kind of regress back to their expectations. They had a rough, I don't know the exact weeks, but I think it was like week 5 through 10. It was basically right after I made the video about them, talking about how they might be legit this time. I might have cursed them. It might actually be my fault. But I think for Liam Cohen to be able to, within his first season, to like recapture that greatness and finish the season on an 8-game winning streak. And yes, things fell short in the playoffs in a tough, close game loss against the Bills. But just to have that, mid-season bounce back, I think speaks to how much locker room buy-in this team had. So from a culture, leadership perspective, every box is checked out the gate with Liam Cohen in his first year. And then the other side of things, Liam Cohen hired previously as the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Bucks, where he did a phenomenal job in 2024 with Baker and that crew. Big part of the hire was, all right, come in, implement the Shanahan-McVay style offense, be that great play caller, get this offense to really click in a way that it hasn't under previous regimes with, don't get me started on Urban Meyer, but the Doug Peterson era certainly had its frustrations in terms of scheme consistency and play calling. And Liam Cohen comes in really without wasting any time and shows that, he didn't just get this thing going. He got it going right away. They put up 26 or more points in 4 of the first 5 weeks. And the 1 week they didn't was a 17-10 win against Houston. Best defense in the NFL last year. And yeah, he brings in all of the kind of proven principles of a Shanahan-McVay style offense, the under center, play action shots, the idea of marrying the run and pass, obviously a proven offensive style around the league when we know that 2/3 of the league runs some variation of this system. But Cohen brings his own, kind of flavor to this thing. Their outside run game was really creative with just various tosses, and their screen game had some really good moments. Their outside run game was really well crafted, just mixing in different variations of pin and pull, toss lead, just getting a little bit creative at times, but ultimately keeping a very balanced run game that kept defenses on their heels. They were kind of right down the middle in terms of man gap, inside zone, outside zone, you name it. Even sprinkling in some, read option and QB runs with Trevor Lawrence at times too, tapping into just enough of that to keep defenses honest. So from a run game perspective, really impressed with Liam Cohen when I think he has probably a little bit more of like a passing game background. He's kind of known as a quarterbacks coach for what he did with like Will Levis back at Kentucky and that kind of stuff. And yeah, the pass game design felt really smooth and well coordinated as well under Liam Cohen. And I think, too, Liam Cohen has shown that he's just a great play caller as well. That's another super important part of this that's consistent with those most highly perceived offensive minds around the league. Not only are you putting this thing together, but you've kind of got your hands on the controller and know what buttons to push at the right time. You're kind of that 12th member of the offense. You can feel the flow of game. Of the game, you can kind of do a good job of anticipating coverages and know what coverage beaters you have and get those big game-changing play calls at the right moment and just have a good run-pass balance on top of all of it. So like every box is just checked with Liam Cohen. I honestly, I can't think of a single bad word to say about him. And a repeat of last year would almost certainly have Cohen finding himself right inside the top 10 of head coach rankings for me. And then you also have Grant Udinski with him. Like, he is super highly perceived. It's a little bit harder because like you can hear what, other teams think about him and they interview him for, big jobs around the league and all that stuff. But like, he's really always been either under Kevin O'Connell or Liam Cohen here. So it's always kind of hard to like separate that and know exactly what he brings to the table. I will say this, like, correlation doesn't always imply causation, right? But it is interesting that as soon as he leaves Minnesota, all of a sudden we have some questions about some of the things Kevin O'Connell was doing with that offense last year. That's the extent I'm going to bring that up, but it's another feather in Grant Udinski's cap. But obviously he's a very highly received mind to have in the building here. And if the Jags can repeat, it does feel like he's going to be in the head coaching chair sooner rather than later. So the Jags get very favorable rankings across the board there, both for the overall coaching culture grades with a B+ grade there, 12th to 15th for my rankings, and that same B+ mark for both pass game and run game coaching, which gets them 5th to 8th for the pass game coaching and 5th to 6th in terms of run game. And then things look pretty good on the defensive side of things too, man. The Jags hired Anthony Campanile, and no, you stupid Americans, I'm not going to say Campanelli. The Italian in me refuses to do so. But Campanile has a linebackers background, was the linebacker coach in Green Bay, did an excellent job there, obviously, with a young Edgerrin Cooper, one of the rare impact rookie linebackers that we've gotten to see over the years. Trying to make Quay Walker look like a serviceable player on the field, did a great job disguising that. And he gets the job here in Jacksonville and really kind of implements his own twist on a system that he ran in Green Bay under Jeff Hafley, because he doesn't just have that year of experience working with Jeff Hafley where they kind of united there. But he was under Vic Fangio in 2023 and Brian Flores in Miami. So he didn't just have the sort of Robert Saleh coaching tree background for a year there. Working with Vic and Brian Flores is about as damn impressive of a resume as you're going to be able to put out there. And also just bringing different, being able to kind of pick what he likes from those different systems and putting it together here in Jacksonville. And that's kind of what we saw. We definitely expected a more off-zone, split safety, more zone coverage-oriented coverage structure. And that's exactly what we got, especially cover 6. This is consistent with both Vic Fangio and Jeff Hafley, running a ton of cover 6. The Eagles were number 1 in it last year. The Packers under Hafley were 5th in the NFL in cover 6 last year, and the Jags were 2nd in cover 6. So that wasn't a huge surprise. Cover 6 is going to be most effective out of those split safety looks, and then mixing in your downward rotations, rotating it into a single high, running some cover 3, obviously running a decent amount of quarters, cover 4. What was going to be interesting is that Campanile ran a lot of cover 2 in Green Bay, yet Vic Fangio, he stays pretty far away from cover 2. The Eagles only ran cover 2.5% of the time last year. And while they were 26th in the NFL in cover 2 rate, Campanile kind of met in the middle of rates in terms of how much he ran it in Green Bay and how much he would have run it under Vic Fangio. Regardless, though, you're always going to see some similarities between kind of a Robert Saleh scheme coverage structure and a Vic Fangio coverage structure with that split safety zone base, and then basically running as much cover 1 man as your cornerbacks will allow you to run. And they dealt with a lot of different lineups at cornerback last year, and they didn't run a ton of man. But what was certainly unique about Campanile's defense here is the blitz rate and how he took a coverage structure from the Fangio, Saleh tree, Hafley, Saleh tree, and says, I like that side of things. But he came in and said, I want to be more aggressive. I want to dip into some of the Brian Flores shit that we got to do in Miami. And the Jags heated teams up. They blitzed a good amount. They were 10th in the NFL in blitz rate. And I think that was kind of a perfect blend of the modern meta that we talk about with the split safety zone coverages that are giving teams fits around the league right now, utilizing that, but not being too conservative, getting impact blitzes, and keeping teams on their toes thinking, you know what, there is a decent chance we're going to get 5-6 man rushes. We might have to keep that back or tight end in to protect against this thing, but not going too far in the blitz category either. So you might get teams keep extra guys in protection and then, oh, sorry, there's the changeup we did actually rush for, and now we've got we've got you outnumbered. So things were just really well designed, really well run, and this is to me a really nice blend of a lot of the systems having the most success in the NFL right now. So I'm very high on the schematic background that Company is able to bring to the table here, and talk about a good defensive play caller, taking that jump from linebackers coach to defensive coordinator and taking a Jags defense that was adequate on paper. And they were, for all, by most measures, a top 10 defense for the majority of last season. And they won their fair share of games on the heels of their defense as well, not just thanks to Liam Cohen's offense. So, he is a guy that they're going to be at risk of losing. I think he is very high on the radar of teams looking for defensive-minded head coaches. Again, makes it not critical that they get it done and win a Super Bowl this year, but it does kind of make it an important year to kind of capitalize on this coaching window while you have these guys in place. Because even after 1 year, this already looks like one of the better coaching staffs in the league. And that's just I'm not going to take a coaching staff that's only done it for 1 year and say this is a top 3 to 5 coaching staff in the league. But they were one of the best coach teams in the league last year. And if they repeat that, obviously, that's just what you have here in Jacksonville is elite coaching. So I really think this is the biggest asset and driver of this Jags team, which should get you pretty fired up as a starting point. Now, we are going to go in depth and take a look at this roster. But before we do that, I want to thank the sponsor for today's video, and that is Prize Picks. We've got the NFL preseason coming up, and it's always fun when football comes back, but let's be honest, preseason games can be a little bit tough to watch at times. Well, Prize Picks lineups, where you're selecting player stats, more or less, anything from passing yards, touchdowns, you name it, string together your lineups and compete for a chance at big cash prizes. Prize Picks lineups will keep you invested in those preseason games into the third, fourth quarter, certainly, especially if you're a football nut and looking at some of those backups that you maybe performing well in these preseason games. So really like what Prize Picks is able to offer for the preseason, but they've got MLB and so many other different events that you can make lineups for. They also have team picks, so you can pick the winner, spread, and total for any major game. And that's available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. Jags fans, they got you covered there. And now if you use code HMA, they have a new offer where if you win your first $5 lineup, Prize Picks will give you $150 off of that. So an exciting new offer there. That's code HMA. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's video. And let's get into this roster now. And we'll begin at quarterback. And likewise with the coaching staff, no change in the quarterback room. So for offseason changes, they stay neutral here. But let's talk about Trevor Lawrence, who heads into this year as my 11th ranked quarterback overall. And that's obviously a good spot, right? Trevor Lawrence is a very good quarterback. There is no conversation at this point about is he a guy they can win a Super Bowl with? Should they be keeping their eyes open for other quarterbacks? Should they be paying Trevor Lawrence? No, he with competent coaching showed he can be a really good quarterback, if nothing else, and can play at a level that is enough to help a team win 13 games, drive explosive offensive performances, and hopefully win a Super Bowl here in Jacksonville if things continue to be stable around him, especially. Now, Trevor Lawrence to me is a frustrating quarterback to rank and discuss and project, frankly, because all of the things I just said are true, right? He has incredible tools. His arm is maybe even underrated at this point because he was the golden boy, golden armed quarterback coming out and all that. He made a throw against the Jets this year that, we always talk about the Caleb Williams throw against the Packers in the playoffs. Lawrence made one of those last year. It just happened to come middle of the year on a Sunday at noon against the freaking New York Jets, so no one remembers it, but it showcased just how ridiculous Lawrence's arm is. He is crazy explosive and fast for a guy his size. And he also just has a nice enough baseline of ability to make the right reads, make all the throws, with that great arm. Liam Cohen can call any passing concept. Lawrence has that arm talent to put the ball to any part of the field when he wants, where he wants, you name it. Like the floor over the course of a season is just really nice with a Trevor Lawrence. But Lawrence is frustrating to me in the sense of inconsistency. And obviously, like, that is such an easy word to throw around and can come off as like lazy analysis. But with Trevor, it's just, you don't know when these little blips are going to show up in his games, on his tape, and just kind of hold him back at large. It's like driving down a freeway in a Ferrari, and you know it's not the most well-kept freeway, and you could get a series of road bumps within the next 50 feet. You might drive 20 miles, and then you hit a road bump, but you kind of feel at this point like those road bumps are coming with Trevor Lawrence. And I kind of boil it down to 3 areas of his game that just haven't really progressed from earlier in his career, even showed up in such a successful season last year. And until he kind of weeds this thing out and proves that he can be a more like consistently elite quarterback, I'm not really expecting more of an up arrow, more growth on Trevor Lawrence to like get out of this kind of high end of tier 3 for example, for like how I view him as a quarterback. But the 3 things that keep showing up for me with Trevor Lawrence throughout the years, number 1 is just like, despite all the arm talent, at any given moment, he is prone to have accuracy issues. More often than not, it's overthrows on the deep ball or out routes. But sometimes, like, you know, which is an overthrow, but like sailing balls over the middle of the field that can end up in the hands of the defense. It's frustrating because I know he can make every throw, and there's been constant talk about, oh, he's trying to fix his footwork, and you know, they're going to get that figured out and get him more consistent. Well, it's like, okay, let's freaking see that, because it just hasn't been the case, and he's heading into year 6 now, right? So that's a point of frustration with him. The other thing is, like, while I think he has a good baseline of processing and decision making, and he'll play on time, like, I don't think he necessarily has issues holding on to the ball too long, or that he's not able to go through reads and like make pro reads and go through an NFL offense and that kind of stuff. I think he's got a really solid level in terms of processing and decision making. There's just random moments where you're just like, what the F was that, Trevor? Blind heaves into double coverage, throwing the ball straight to linebackers, just bad reads where he doesn't see defenders. Like, there are some really head-scratching moments with him, and it's not just the mistakes. There's like just missed easy reads that show up with him in terms of, you know, good decision-making with the ball, putting the ball in the right spot to move the chains and that kind of stuff. It's generally pretty good, but it's not elite, certainly not. And then there's the third thing with Trevor Lawrence that I honestly said about him going all the way back to who he was as a prospect. And it's like, everything's amazing with him, but he does at times lack that like great pocket feel, that spatial awareness to just consistently mitigate pressure, to consistently know when and how to use his feet. He is dynamic, and it's, you know, it's just like accuracy. Like, there are great examples of him dropping incredible dimes, and then there's times of him just like randomly sailing balls out of nowhere, right? That's the same thing with his pocket presence, where, okay, 4 times out of 5, he might do a really good job sensing that he's under pressure, getting out of the pocket when he needs to, or staying in a clean pocket when he needs to. But there are enough frustrating moments with him where I either want to see him do more with his legs at times, or do a better job just mitigating that pressure, finding the open space in the pocket, extending plays inside the pocket. Pocket presence is always one of those tough things to analyze, because there's not really a PFF number or an analytic point you can point to. It's just something that you kind of just got to watch the tape and come to a conclusion on. And for me, that's something that when you compare him to the other elite quarterbacks in the NFL, he can leave a bit to be desired in terms of that natural pocket feel. Now, none of these combine to like hold him back again from being the 11th quarterback in the NFL, but you get these little inconsistent moments from those 3 different traits. And I think that kind of explains Trevor Lawrence as a quarterback, where everybody wants him to be more, and he's never really taken that leap. And I think even last year, you can watch the tape, you can look back at what he did, and and see him, tied for 19th out of 26 starting quarterbacks in turnover-worthy play percentage, and 19 being on the bad side of things there. Like, he was tied for 7th highest turnover-worthy play rate. He realistically had a bit of a roller coaster season where, while the offense was working at first, Trevor did actually kind of struggle. The first 4 weeks of the season, he had 0 big-time throws to 7 turnover-worthy plays. In that week 5 Jags video that I did, where I was like, hey, look at all the great thing the Jags are doing. A big part of that video was like, hey, they're kind of doing this while Trevor's not playing great. And then he had an uptick in play. Mid-season hits during that kind of losing stretch, and he had another really bad run, weeks 10 through 12, and then he locked in again, played great through the stretch. They go on that 8-game win streak, and then I would say in the playoff game against Buffalo, it was a inconsistent game. Some really good moments, and honestly, some really bad reads mixed in there as well. Really costly interception, just throwing the ball to Shaq Thompson early in the game. So I don't want to end on a negative note. Again, he's my 11th ranked quarterback. The Jags are in good hands with him. I like Trevor Lawrence. They can absolutely win a Super Bowl with him. But I don't think you can have a Trevor Lawrence conversation without discussing his frustrating inconsistencies. I'm glad we can kind of dissect that here in this video and point to like what those actual inconsistencies are in terms of evaluating his play and his tape. But until that stuff gets cleaned up, he is, to me, going to be more of a tier 3 quarterback, which by my definition is a really good player, someone you can win a Super Bowl with the right infrastructure, someone you definitely pay, but someone that probably needs a little bit more help. And honestly, every player is so different. It's tough to boil every individual player into a certain definition. I think in some of these tier 3 quarterbacks' case, like a Trevor Lawrence, it's not even so much like, oh, he needs the right infrastructure with offensive line and playmakers and that kind of stuff. Because when Trevor is on, he can elevate an offense. He can have those elite games. But in his case, it's like, if you're going to win a Super Bowl with Trevor Lawrence, maybe it's not so much about you need the right surrounding cast. It's you're hoping you get to January and you can get a 4-game stretch of him staying hot. And it's maybe a little bit more of a dice roll in that sense. Now, of course, having a good surrounding cast is always going to help a guy play 4 straight weeks of good quarterback. But even when things are good for Trevor Lawrence, sometimes he can't help but shoot himself in the foot. But there is your Trevor Lawrence quarterback conversation. I hope that's a fair, honest look at where they're at with him as a quarterback. Despite some of the negative points, he is certainly one of the best things that the Jags have going for them, and is a good enough quarterback that they can go win a Super Bowl as early as this year with him playing at even the current level that he's at. Now, Nick Mullins as the backup, not so much. If we get to that point, the Jags season is unfortunately over. But with quarterback out of the way, let's continue to take a look at the rest of this roster. And next up, we are going to look at running back here. And I mentioned earlier in the video, like, the Jags didn't necessarily have an offseason where they got a whole lot better. On paper, they actually said goodbye to some pretty important players from last year, and one of those guys was Travis Etienne, who, we spend so much time talking about, like, oh, running backs are replaceable, they don't really matter. Well, Travis Etienne played like a running back that did really matter last year, and especially like in the first month of the year when Trevor Lawrence was struggling, those were a lot of wins that they did end up getting because of a lot of the big explosive long runs and runs with broken tackles that Etienne did bring to the table. And, he was still pretty damn good outside of those first 4 games as well. So that is a big loss, right? They're looking to replace those shoes. They opt to not give him a decent contract that the Saints gave him, but not a ton of money. So like, that's a very notable move that they decided to make this offseason. And in response to that, they didn't draft anybody. They did go get Chris Rodriguez from the Commanders, which he's not Travis Etienne. It is a downgrade at running back, but we're going to talk about Chris Rodriguez. I don't want to just entirely dismiss that as an addition and as just getting nothing here, because I don't think it's nothing. But with Etienne gone, the Jags do come in that bottom tier of the last ranking running back rooms in the NFL, 30th to 32nd. And we're going to start with Byshell Tootin here. And I wanted to make sure before I did this deep dive, Byshell Tootin had, I think, 82 or 83 carries last year. I wanted to make sure I watched every single one of them. Thanks to NFL Pro, that takes like 10 minutes now, which is phenomenal. But the Jags are really hoping for big things with him to replace that explosive factor that they had in HN last year. So I wanted to load up the tape because I liked him as a day 3 value. I thought we saw some really interesting moments with him, making guys miss with the explosiveness, but I wanted to, load it all up and see what we can maybe project here this year. And I'm just being honest. I'm just saying what I see with my eyes. I actually have some concerns with Byshell Tootin. I do. And maybe I'm crazy and he becomes a stud and I have to apologize for this in the future, but he to me did have a lot of vision problems. On inside runs especially, felt to me like a back that was overcompensating for his absurd fumbling issues that he had at Virginia Tech. And I'm glad he didn't fumble last year, but he was so often running up to the line, 2 hands on the ball, running into the back of his line. And occasionally you'd see him kind of like spin through or truck through for some tough yardage, but not consistently enough. And just missing lanes, whether it was in the designed hole where he's just not seeing it, not hitting it with the right pace, or missing opportunities to, when runs stall out, having the vision and kind of spatial awareness to keep enough space to maybe make a guy miss, make an extra move, find that second lane, that bounce out lane. A lot of times where you're seeing Byshell Tootin not see those opportunities. Now, obviously, like, he is really explosive, and when he was in space, he did a really good job making guys miss. He's got speed. I'm excited to see what he does in the receiving game with HN gone, because that was a big role for Travis Etienne. And, there's going to be a lot of targets coming out of this backfield that Tootin can prove to be a more, high volume pass catcher and an explosive playmaker in that sense. But I really do kind of have some worries that this could be like some of those low end, like DeAndre Swift seasons at times, like Miles Sanders in Carolina. I have some issues. Like, I saw a lot of that player here in Tootin. I'm just telling you what I saw. So I have some concerns that he's going to kind of live up to the new expectations that have been placed on him, because it's not like they really did a lot to challenge his opportunity here. So I would love to be wrong about that. I think he's a fun player. The opportunity is great if he, and sometimes these guys do develop, right? Like, I think DeAndre Swift in year 6 or whatever it was in Chicago last year, I think he figured it out. Some of those things we were talking about with bad vision, that can click at any given moment for a back like Tootin with the physical talent he has. But vision and pacing and running back decision making is an extremely important part of this. And I questioned what I saw there. But if things can click there, if he gets, I think it is a comfort thing with him too. Like, it did feel very clear to me, like he was like, I cannot fumble. I have this history of fumbles coming out of college. If I start fumbling, they're going to put me in the doghouse, and as a 3rd, 4th round pick, I can lose that job. Like, maybe it's a confidence thing, right? We see him start to get that offhand ready, show a little bit more of that creative running style that I know is in there. And it's probably not just a fumbling thing as well. It probably ties back to some vision questions. Like, he kind of wanted to just hit the hole and push forward and not get yelled at for bouncing things outside. But that's part of the beauty of being Byshell Tootin, is having some of that creative vision. So there was just stuff on tape that I wanted to like him a lot more than I did. And because of that, I'm slightly betting against Byshell Tootin. I'm not counting out the prospects that he could be great. And obviously if he can pair his talents with better skill at the running back position, they're going to shatter this ranking that I have on them at running back. But I don't think that's just a given. And another part of this is, after I had some questions about Byshell Tootin and then noticed that Chris Rodriguez actually got a 2-year, $10 million contract here, and was reminded by our good friend Garrett on the Football Analysis channel that Chris Rodriguez was Liam Cohen's back at Kentucky. I was like, I got to go make sure I watch Chris Rodriguez's carries too. And that was actually a fun reminder to me that he actually ran for 500 yards on over 100 carries in Washington last year. And he looked damn good doing it. I saw very much like a Tyler Algier type of runner where he does not, it was night and day going from Tutin's carries to Rodriguez's carries, where it's like, all right, this guy's got pro-made vision. Like, he presses the line, he hits the hole with explosiveness and confidence, and understands where he needs to adjust his lane to get into that second level. And he doesn't have the speed that Tutin has, but in order to tap into any element of explosiveness, you got to get to that second level. And Rodriguez is able to get to that second level with some toughness and a nice downhill running style. So if we get 5 weeks into this thing and Tutin's really struggling with the consistent down to down inside run, especially because I know Tutin can run outside zone and get tosses and, you know, have that elusiveness in space. It's a reason like his floor is still pretty nice. He's got a 74 rating for me. There's still stuff to like there, but I think early on they're going to try to make Tutin, you know, Travis Etienne and give him the full workload, mix in Rodriguez as a short yardage guy. But if Tutin starts to struggle, I think we see Rodriguez potentially, like, in some ways take over this backfield, sort of similar. And I know I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth here because DeAndre Swift did play well in Chicago last year, but kind of like what we saw with Kyle Monangai in Chicago last year. Like, there are a lot of parallels between those two players here in Jacksonville. But even if Swift showed some improvements to his vision and running style and getting north and south more efficiently, Kyle Monangai was still better at it, right? And as the season went on, they were still like, well, we got to go to Monangai because he's just better. You know, maybe that's a stretch, but I think Chris Rodriguez could really become a guy that is the one getting 15, 16 touches a game here, and Tutin actually becomes more of the changeup guy, the guy that is more of the third down back. Yes, will occasionally be asked to run in between the tackles, but more of like last year, it's like, well, we're going to try to run crack toss and get you out in space, and you're going to be the lightning to Chris Rodriguez's thunder. This could go in any given direction, and Chris Rodriguez might not even be that good. I'm just saying I was impressed by his tape in a way that I wasn't in Tutin. It's kind of the point of this series, is for me to watch the tape and report back on like how I feel about these guys, and that's what I saw. So could age poorly, could age well. My kind of hot take prediction, I guess, and I don't have a lot of like hot take predictions in this series, but I found one on this Jags team, is that Chris Rodriguez is actually the back I want in fantasy for this team. For all the reasons we talked about, I think he could be a little gem of a signing here. And Tutin's kind of the flashy new toy, whereas, yeah, Rodriguez has been, you know, in the league for a few years and it hasn't really been given an opportunity in Washington, but it doesn't mean he hasn't ran well when he has gotten those opportunities. It was enough to still get a very nice contract from the Jags here. So I think he's quite underrated as a sleeper value here and is probably going to be a bigger part of this team than most people realize. So I do like the addition, obviously, of Chris Rodriguez. Both these guys, at the end of the day, though, are very unproven, hence why the Jags rank so low at running back in a series where I'm ranking proven commodities and these players and these position groups at their floor, really, as we head into the year. But they are, of course, a wild card identified unit for me, which is to say they could absolutely transcend this ranking, and if they do, it's going to go a long way towards the Jags having the success they're looking for as a team this year. Now, let's talk about the depth, because there are some more names here. Like Lakeem Allen got on the field as a 7th-round rookie in a crowded backfield doing exactly what he was good at Clemson, which is he is, for a young back, an excellent pass protector. He's smooth in the receiving game. He's decent enough as a runner that you can give him runs out of the gun on third downs and stuff. He should have a role in the NFL for a long time. But he's just not crazy explosive and probably never going to become like a starter, but should be able to do what they ask him to do in that role. They do sign Amir Abdullah, and that's not a nothing of a signing. Like, we've kind of just, I guess, pretended Amir Abdullah stopped existing, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago, but he's very quietly like made some plays as a third down back. And, you know, he was pretty pretty hyped up prospect that didn't live up to his hype, but he's 33 years old and still looked good last year on the Colts. So harder to see how he gets on the field. It's probably a Tootin injury, or if Tootin really is struggling, maybe we see Abdullah be this kind of sneaky veteran that like is productive here. Pretty unlikely it comes to that though. DJ Dallas also kind of like redundant with LaKeith Allen. I don't really see a use for having DJ Dallas, who's just an older version of that third down pass protection oriented back. You still have 3 cheap years of control on LaKeith Allen, so I'm not sure he makes the team, but he is good at that. And then Jamari Taylor was a nice undrafted pickup. There's a non-zero chance that they're looking for someone that can be a steady, consistent inside runner. If Tootin struggles, let's say Chris Rodriguez gets hurt, the next guy I want to give a handoff to on inside zone or gap is probably Jamari Taylor, who is really not physically talented, but he's got a nice north and south one-cut slashing mentality, and he was really good at getting the most out of well-blocked runs in college, and I thought in a bad running back class, he was draftable. So nice pickup there. But yeah, honestly, this is the worst position group on paper for the Jaguars, and they got to hit some green lights here if they're going to have as much success running the ball as they did last year. You know, we can sit here and act like running backs don't matter, but we watched Travis Etienne last year. He was pretty sweet, and this was a top 12, top even 10 at times run game last year. And, you know, I think these backs do have to be more consistently dependable than what they've proven to this point in these guys' careers if they're going to get back to that point. And if we see later on that the Jags run game doesn't rank as high heading into the year as they finished last year, well, yeah, they lost Travis Etienne here. But let's go to the pass catchers here. And on paper, in regards to their weapons, there's not a ton of big changes. Like, they didn't really lose anybody. Okay, at wide receiver, Diami Brown, Tim Patrick, who were wide receiver 4 and 5 for them last year and didn't really give them much. Diami Brown was disappointing. It's not really notable losses there. Johnny Munt was a decent tight end too for them, but nothing that isn't replaceable. In terms of like real additions on paper, it was through the draft. They did actually spend a decent amount of draft picks on pass catchers, but this comes back to, I mean, let's be honest, like a draft class that has become a meme, that essentially James Gladstone is going to have to prove that he is the smart guy in the room, because they just went off the beaten path with most of their draft picks. And the pass catchers especially, it was like, all right, these guys are here now, but is it realistic to have much expectation for CJ Williams, Josh Cameron, his 6th round picks, even a 2nd round pick in Nate Borkircher, Tanner Koziel in the 5th round? Like, outside of Josh Cameron, these were all guys that were probably reaches. And we'll talk about these guys' skill sets and what chances they have of being good draft picks for this team at the end of the day. But hard to look at those additions and get overly excited about it. Honestly, the main thing you're excited about is another thing we talked about in the intro, and that is Travis Hunter, who gets hurt week 6, was it? And gets shut down for the season before they ever really even figure out how to use him at wide receiver. Now, he's a unique conversation here. I think especially at wide receiver, we can't quite call that like a massive addition with him coming back from injury yet. But it is slightly upgraded at wide receiver in my opinion, because Travis Hunter should be available all season long here, hopefully. But let's get into this group of pass catchers. A unit that comes in right in the middle of the league for me. It is a good group of pass catchers right now, a unit that especially played better as the season went on. So they get a B grade for me, 12th to 17th, but they do get that wild card icon because there's upside for them to get into the top 10 for weapons, which last year, by the way, while the Jags team ranking was certainly lower than 15 heading into last season, they had higher expectations heading into the year with the weaponry than I have them even here, where they were pushing top 10 with a rookie Travis Henner coming into the league and Brian Thomas Jr. coming off of his rookie season. We were hoping that was going to break through as like the best, one of the best wide receiver duos in the league. And this group of weapons has changed a lot over the course of a year, honestly. Thomas and Hunter are still here. We're going to talk about them, but with Jakobi Meyers entering the picture here and Parker Washington breaking out last year and Bretton Strange continuing to prove how solid he is, this is a group that has more depth and honestly a nice floor. But the idea of this being a top 10 group of pass catchers and a really prolific, like difference-making aspect of this Jags team that can help propel this team towards a Super Bowl, we're in a different spot than we were last year.
We live in a different world than we did just 30 seconds ago.
Because right now, Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter's impact on this offense that we were so excited about the upside of these guys last year is in flux. Brian Thomas Jr. has entered a lot of trade rumor tweets, for whatever stock you want to put into it, that those have shown up for a reason, because he really struggled last year and straight up sucked at points in the season. Thomas was a polarizing draft prospect in the sense that, he's a freak athlete. He can get open deep. They don't make him like Brian Thomas, right? And in his rookie season, we saw him clicking and what that can look like when he's on. But there were moments in his LSU tape too where it was like, man, the ball skills, the physicality at the catch point, the drops, some ugly moments on his tape that led to some like Marquez Valdez-Scantling comps. After year one, you're like, it's in the past. This dude's a dog. He's only going to get better. He's only going to get better at, winning contested catches. And he didn't really have drop problems in his rookie season for the most part. Felt like he kind of shook that off of his resume. And then he said, hold my beer, watch me try and play for the first half of this season, where it was hideous. Drops, just getting out muscled at the catch point. Someone that this team was really leaning on to be the number one target, to make catches in those critical moments, those have to have him third downs, those times where they're looking for him to get explosive plays through the air, and you just couldn't count on him. And Brian Thomas Jr. stock was about as low as you could have possibly imagined, considering how great he looked in his rookie season. Out of that first year, there were some Jags fans that were mad at me that I didn't rate him higher than Malik Neighbors out of that incredible rookie draft class. I think this is a case and a testament to why I'm a little bit slower to raise these guys up and why I do value multiple years of incredible performance before we start to get those, tier 1, tier 2 elite superstar coded types of players that we talk about in that light. You do got to go out and sustain that success. And right now, Brian Thomas is let's just say, not sustained that level of play. Now, in the second half of the year, things cooled off. There was still some frustrating moments, but was much more good than bad. Saw him winning some more of those tough catches like he did in his rookie season. Saw what his verticality can bring to the offense. He goes from 6 drops in the first 7 weeks of the season to just 2 drops in 7 games the rest of the way, including the playoff game. Did have a little bit of an injury in there as well. That's not necessarily a concern for him. But yeah, we've basically had one incredible rookie season, one half of a putrid season where you're talking about trading him and basically have to acquire Jakobi Meyers because you're desperate for anybody that can catch the football and not drop it. And then a second half of the year where he was pretty solid, pretty good. So where does he land this year? That's the ultimate question, right? And he's an undoubted wild card. I think the Jags are right to have not traded him and sell low. I still believe in the separation. I think, especially now as we'll talk about Myers and Washington, his role is hard to find. That Alec Pierce, Christian Watson level deep threat. To me, that was the most realistic projection for Brian Thomas, was probably not to be a elite number one type of guy. He does still theoretically have that upside if the ball skills can really become more consistent. But I still think he can bring a ton of value to the table if he can become a more reliable vertical threat, take the top off the defense, and really help open things up, not just for these more short to intermediate types of weapons, getting safeties off their ass because they have to respect Brian Thomas over the top, but also helping the run game too, because these safeties do have to respect that over the top threat off of play action. So he is a huge numbers changer, and I think it was smart to stand by him instead of trading him off, sending him to the Rams for like a late second round pick or something. So like, I'm glad they kept him, but it is a huge season. And if we start to see like a guy that just can't catch the damn football, you're going to end up, pretty frustrated with Brian Thomas Jr. You're hoping that's not who he is. In fact, you're hoping, hell, maybe he can get back on track to how we viewed him after that rookie season, and he can be just the alpha superstar do-it-all guy here. But let's just land the plane as like a Christian Watson, Alec Pierce type of guy first, and then we can maybe raise the bar again. So he's a huge wild card. And then I will actually talk about Travis Hunter next, even though, he's really not a starter here. I just think narratively it makes sense to talk about him. There was some report that like, he's going to be a full-time corner, and then people were panicking like, oh my God, they're already giving up on the two-way player thing. I even got involved in that discourse, and basically Jags fans just misunderstood that tweet for the most part, because I was saying like, they can't afford for him to not play both ways with how much they gave up for him. And I got a lot of flack from Jags Twitter for saying they gave up the equivalent of 3 first-round picks. Look, I get it was 2 firsts and a very early second. You want to slam me for that take, that's fine. But investing the 5th round, the 5th overall pick in the trade up, the 36th pick, and your first rounder this year, which was what, 2024 or whatever it was. The big selling point in why you're able to give up that much for a non-quarterback is this guy's actually 2 players. He's a wide receiver and a cornerback. He's going to return extra value and be worth a couple of those first-round picks for us. So to me, the Jags cannot afford to give up on the two-way player thing so soon, and I certainly don't think they intend to. But it does seem that they are actually picking a plan, because last year it felt like they were kind of pussyfooting around. Do we give them a couple drives on defense, couple drives on offense? Like, let's just kind of see what he does well and wing it. I like that this year they're actually like committing to more of a hard stance on what his role is going to be. And that appears to be, and I kind of like this direction with how the wide receiver situation has kind of reached a good baseline with some of these guys we have yet to talk about, especially just from what this team needs right now. But their plan is like, no, he's going to be a full-time cornerback, and then we are going to find packages for him on offense. And that was, I'm pretty sure I said, like, it's a hard balance. It's hard to know exactly what you're supposed to do, and I don't fully fault the Jags, but I'm pretty sure my take was that, like, it's probably best to just go full-time corner. It feels like it's probably easier to get a package player on offense than it is to do a package player on defense, or to kind of split the difference. So I think this is the right plan for how to kind of get him rolling as a two-way superstar in the NFL. What I do hope is that they're able to look at some of the ridiculous catches he made in the last couple of weeks of his season before the injury. Because at first, when he played, it was like, here's a bubble screen or a jet sweep or a speed out. Go make a corner miss and give us some rack. Like, and Travis Hunter can do that 100%, but he is the biggest selling point on Travis Hunter is the generational ball skills that he has to go make catches down the field, to elevate, to attack the ball, to contort his body. And he started to make some of those catches because they were slowly figuring this out. Like, all right, we gotta push the ball downfield to Travis Hunter, especially with Brian Thomas starting to struggle. So I'm optimistic that, you hear package play wide receiver so often that is a gadget, gimmick receiver or whatever on those short, quick touches. To me, it's like, let's get him more in like the 12 personnel, because that actually would make a lot of sense. The Jags, with that Sean McVay background, are not a huge 12 personnel team. They ran it 18% of the time. Just getting him familiar with the 12 personnel playbook maybe would make sense, because I think of Travis Hunter's skill set, how to like realistically get him, call it like manufactured or predetermined in some ways, like looks to get those down the field targets. I think of the play action Shanahan 2-man route combinations with Brian Thomas running the post, Travis Hunter running the crossing route. You can flip it around or do whatever. But to me, it's like, that seems like a good baseline. It's like, hey, we're running 12 personnel about 20% of the time. Let's get Travis Hunter up to speed on our 12 personnel playbook. And then, yeah, we might just throw him out there on third down as an X and just say, you're running a go, or you're running a comebacker, and if Trevor needs you in a pinch, go make a catch. And yeah, maybe you have some other gadget quick touch designs for him as well. But there's an endless amount of different ways they could deploy Travis Hunter. That to me is just what kind of would make sense. So we'll see how that kind of ages. Long term, I will say this, I feel like probably in the minority at this point, but I still do believe in the idea that he can be the Shohei Ohtani of football and eventually be a superstar on both sides of the ball. I think it is like, you got to raise the floor. You got to kind of start somewhere with him. You can't just throw it all on his plate at the NFL level and expect it to be great. Granted, they didn't even really try to do that. Yes, he got hurt, but it's not like he was playing so many snaps that it was like a fatigue thing. Like the injury was probably more of a fluke. So I'm not even so sure that he's not so special that you can't just throw everything on his plate and he can make it work. Now, I understand the approach of like, let's not do that. Obviously, this is all unique, and nobody knows the right way to go about Travis Hunter. But what I'm saying is, go back to what I said about Travis Hunter as a wide receiver prospect. I actually think he was an even better wide receiver prospect than he was a corner prospect. He was awesome at both. My pro comp on him was the best case scenario, CeeDee Lamb, because he does have the great run after catch ability. I think there is still room for him to refine his routes, which is probably still the biggest area of his game to develop, would be a full developed route tree. But the incredible ball skills, the rare athleticism, someday I still think it could happen. As long as he continues to prove that he can hold up and you start to put more and more on his plate as we go along with this thing, that's exciting. Is that this year? Is that 3 years from now? I don't know. Nobody knows. But I feel like a lot of the discourse around Travis Hunter is like, we're largely giving up on the two-way player thing. He's a corner that's occasionally going to get some targets. It's like, I don't think that's their long-term plan. I don't, but I like their short-term plan here as well, with him really as a non-starter for this team. So to kind of bring this full circle and transition to talking about the rest of this group of weapons, I would love someday, and maybe that could be late this season or whatever, I would love someday to get back on that trajectory of like, dude, Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, it doesn't get any better than that. Like, this could be something more similar to like what the Bengals have with Chase and Higgins, what the Cowboys have with CD and Pickens. And you're like, dude, they're like a driving force of a potentially elite offense. Like, I would love to get back to that someday, and that's why the wild card is here for this group of weapons, because that's where the upside comes from, is like those two guys. But what is nice is that the floor of this situation heads into the year in a much better spot. You had points early in last season, especially, where, like, yes, Trevor had his struggles that we talked about, but I know there was some Jags fans listening to that, like, dude, our receivers couldn't catch a pass, and there's a lot of truth to that as well. The receivers, I mean, Jacoby Myers was not here, but Parker Washington hadn't really broken through yet. That's when Thomas was struggling the most. You have so much more confidence heading into this year with Myers and Washington especially being a core part of this thing. And Myers just came in and was everything he's always been, short to intermediate, physical, consistent beast. Like, I don't feel the need to spend too much time on Jakobi Meyers because his skill set is more self-explanatory. Like, he does have some inside-out flexibility. He's not very fast, but he is a savvy route runner, kind of like a poor man's version of a Keenan Allen, if you will. But God damn it if he didn't change things for this team. Just when it was third down and they needed someone to go over the middle of the field, take a hit from the safety and move the chains, or don't drop the ball on an out route and move the chains. Meyers was a really awesome addition, probably one of the better mid-season acquisitions you'll see out there, and is obviously a core reason of what we just talked about. Just like you have uncertainty with Thomas and Hunter, the floor is lifted with a Meyers here. And Parker Washington, I mean, it was kind of weird because he was struggling early, and his early season struggles and really just like his inconsistency throughout his 3-year career before last year, like his skill set, they wanted him to be what they were targeting in Jakobi Meyers as that physical short to intermediate trust guy. But they couldn't trust him. They go to get Jakobi Meyers and they acquire that asset. And then, I don't know if he just observed Jakobi Meyers and decided it's time for him to finally be that guy, or what, but the light just came on for Parker Washington, and he was awesome from like mid-season, week 9 onward, and like unstoppable in that playoff game against the Bills. And I feel like I probably under-celebrated Parker Washington, probably because it's been 2 years of waiting for that light to come on. But I had a 3rd-round grade on him coming out. I saw some shades of something like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, that skill set, the Jakobi Meyers skill set. Like, not to say he's Amon-Ra, but the idea of like, okay, you're not that fast, but super physical, wins tough catches, largely short to intermediate, tough guy to bring down after the catch. Like Washington, 5'10", 212 pounds, like very similar size to these guys. And just overnight, Washington decided, I'm going to be one of those guys. So after having like no reliable wide receivers, not ones that are playing full time anyway, with Travis Hunter being hurt and not playing full time on offense, you end up with no reliable receivers. To all of a sudden you snap your finger and you got just 2 of these guys. And all of a sudden you end up with an offense where, all right, Trevor's able to sling it into the middle of the field, run the Shanahan offense, keep the chains moving, and not have these just frustrating setbacks where things are going well and then all of a sudden it's 3rd and 8 and the ball just clanks off a guy's hands and all of a sudden your drive is dead. Like you just didn't have that. There's the reliability ramped up exponentially with these guys. So you're going to continue to see that with these guys kind of being interchangeable. They both can play inside and out. I don't know how much more upside there is with these guys. You could argue Parker Washington, like, if we're getting nitpicky about it, like he probably played above this 79 rating mark. He really was special. I mean, he had over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in the final 4 games of his season. Like, if you just look at what he did in the last month of his season, that honestly probably is something closer to like effing Amon-Ra St. Brown. You know how it is with these guys that just like aren't overly physically talented. Like Amon-Ra is the outlier in this category of wide receiver. I think Jakobi Meyers is more of the like realistic good scenario for Parker Washington. So I didn't put the up arrow on Parker Washington, but sure, like maybe something really has clicked and he's just a demon and, going to terrorize the NFL and keep up his 65% contested catch win rate that he put up last season. Maybe. Can't rule it out, certainly. But I do think having both these guys just makes it so easy to just plug Brian Thomas into that vertical skill set heading into the year. Like, that's the game plan. Don't worry about running a bunch of, digs over the middle of the field on 3rd down and having to be the move the chains possession wide receiver that we got to have it on 3rd down. It makes it so much easier to have more of a game plan for how Travis Hunter's going to rotate in and around here. Realistically, Meyers and Washington can be the foundation here, and hopefully Thomas and Hunter can sprinkle in some of that dynamism and upside to the point that maybe this could be one of the best group of pass catchers in the league. Now, you've got Brenton Strange as well, and I really like Brenton Strange. I've had to hold my hand up and apologize to Jags fans and admit I was so wrong. I compared him to Richard Rodgers. I thought he was a reach. I didn't see much of a route runner, solid hands. I didn't even think he was that consistent of a blocker at Penn State. And he wasn't great to start, but my goodness, has he developed into one of the true archetype, quality starting wide tight ends in the NFL. Good size, really good blocker, incredibly consistent hands. And when they were struggling earlier in the year, he was the only guy that could help consistently catch the ball, win tough catches, keep drives alive. And then he gets hurt when some of these other guys stepped up. So he missed a good amount of time last year, and their offense had some struggles without him out there. So they're really excited to get him back healthy. He gets the contract extension heading into the year, well-deserved. But it's not just reliable hands and being a really nice run blocker as a true inline wide tight end. But he's got some savviness at the top of his routes. He can separate. He's got decent speed to pull away from linebackers on crossing routes. And he has just gotten incrementally better every year. So until he stops getting better, I'm going to leave the green arrow on him to say that he can be even better than what he's shown us so far. I think something like a Dallas Goedert someday is possible for Brenton Strange as a top 5 or 6 tight end in the NFL and a real problem. I think he's shown us some flashes of that. So I really like what we've seen, and just got to keep kind of climbing up and establishing himself, staying healthy, all that good stuff. But he's a really nice piece on top of all this as well, that his injury last year also sprinkled some inconsistency into all these different pass catchers as well. But after Strange, we're dealing with a pretty steep fall off, in my opinion. I think their wide receiver depth, especially when Travis Hunter, if you have an injury, I don't think they're going to be like, okay, Travis, you're just a starter now. I think they have their plan for Travis. I'm not a fan of their wide receiver depth. Josh Cameron was a tough watch as a wide receiver. I thought maybe if he switched to running back and learned how to pass protect and became like a Samaje Perine type of guy, because he's got really good hands. He's built like a running back and can be tough for corners to get down to the ground. Beyond that, he is... You literally, I don't know that you can find a worse separator at the college level. Every single one of his catches, no matter what route he was running, he had a DB all over him. Now, he did a good job boxing out college DBs, but that's going to get even harder. This screams like N'Keal Harry, JJ Arcega-Whiteside level tape, and I hated those guys as prospects. Cameron was probably even worse. So it was a 6th round pick. He's got a unique skill set. Maybe they can find a plan for him. I just didn't really see it. CJ Williams I didn't get to, but he's got kind of a balanced physical profile, and he was a guy that did click in the second half of his year at Stanford. So of the guys that they kind of went off the beaten path to draft, CJ Williams was one of them, but his profile is at least interesting to me because Stanford does have a record of producing some of these guys like Marvin Michael Wilson and Alec Iomanor. Williams is kind of profiles as that and maybe clicked as that at the end of his year. So maybe he could surprise. I'll give him a chance. Tim Jones has kind of hung around here and done very little with his opportunities. Austin Trammell, just kind of low end slot depth. It's not great in terms of wide receiver depth. It's really not. So you've got to keep your starters healthy there. And then you got your tight end depth and the Nate Borkircher pick. Look, I felt like I had a pretty good idea of what Nate Borkircher was, and I even liked my pro comp on him, and it was Charlie Warner, someone that's 6'4", 245, so he doesn't have typical tight end 2 blocking specialist size, but does block really hard, gets the most out of his frame, but someone that just doesn't really produce in the receiving game, not a great athlete, doesn't really stand out. If you do throw him the ball, he'll catch it usually, but not someone that's going to be much of a mismatch problem or dynamic or anything like that. I like the floor for Nate Borkircher to be something like Charlie Warner. I ain't drafting that in the second freaking round, man. No way. Just a crazy overdraft. Now, of course, I said the same thing about Brenton Strange. So there's like Jags fans own my ass, right? Like I was wrong about Brenton Strange. Does that happen twice? Does a new regime here in Jacksonville literally just do this again and they knew something that myself and literally everybody that watched Nate Borkircher and said, that's a decent, hopeful like tight end too in the NFL someday? Did the Jags see something we didn't? Hopefully, right? But like crazy against the grain, against consensus approach from James Gladstone in this group. And to make him their first pick in this draft, pretty freaking wild. Now, I think in 12 personnel, he can play a decent role, but like, is he going to be better? I mentioned Charlie Warner. Another one of those guys that's had a pretty nice career is Johnny Munt, who cost this team nothing and they let go. So like, that's why you criticize the Nate Borkircher pick. It's like, okay, if like based on his physical, his tape and his profile, like a pretty optimistic outlook for Nate Borkircher is that becomes what Johnny Munt has been in the NFL. The reason you criticize that pick as a second round pick is it's like, well, go sign Johnny Munt for $1.5 million and use the second round pick on any number of starters at a position of value. That's why the pick reeked. Hopefully he can be more than that. I'm not betting on it. Hunter Long is here. He was actually acquired. Jesus, that wasn't the Jalen Ramsey trade, was it? Okay, I'm not entirely making it up. He was sent to Miami for Jalen Ramsey and has now found his way here. But he's, tight end 3, decent enough blocker, did some decent stuff for this team last year. If Nate Borkircher really sucks at it as a rookie, which isn't impossible because it's hard to make that jump, Hunter Long could be that tight end 2 for a year. Tanner Koziol, 5th round pick. We've seen guys like Tanner Koziol come along where they're 6'7", these lanky tight ends that don't block for shit and really can't because they don't have the strength or ability to get low and get that leverage. But with an accurate quarterback, you can be like a big target over the middle of the field for like, third downs or red zone or whatever, like that true red zone threat idea. And we've seen guys like this before, and so many of them have failed. I will say this about Tanner Koziol, like, he probably will not work, and that's why he was a 5th round pick. But of these just tall, lanky, kind of catch everything, like power forward types of tight ends, he did have one of the most impressive reels of contested catches you'll ever see. So like maybe Liam Cohen can find a unique purpose for him, and he can catch 6 or 7 touchdowns a year. It's possible. The Lions once upon a time had a guy like that. I can't remember his name, but they had a guy that kind of did that and was okay at it. Would love if there's a Lions fan that knows who I'm talking about. It was like circa 2014 Detroit Lions. Let's hear that shout out. Then you got Quentin Morris. Probably doesn't make this team. Honestly, he's not particularly good. Justin Herbert's brother is here, still trying to develop at tight end. We talked about those backs as well earlier, and there's your group of weapons. So it's a long conversation. It's a big wild card group. The floor is pretty nice, though. Like, this is a wild card in the sense of, all right, they rank 12th to 17th for me, but could skyrocket, especially with Brian Thomas in that full-time role, getting back to that rookie year. You're probably a top 10 group of weapons, even without Travis Hunter, if Brian Thomas can be that guy. But if you get some kind of blend of like Brian Thomas playing better and Travis Hunter makes an impact, as like one of the most efficient receivers in the league I will say this, there is a chance for Travis Hunter to have like record numbers for yards per route run, because he might come in and only run 7 routes in a game, but end up with 60 yards a game. So like he could end up like shattering yards per route run records, which would be amazing. But yeah, it's a very fun group and should leave this team quite literally in better hands than what they had for the majority of last season. And if the Jags are going to go like be a Super Bowl team this year. I would say part of that is probably this group of pass catchers helping this be more of a prolific, like consistently prolific passing game. But with that, we have one more position group to get into on the offense for the Jags as we take a look at the offseason changes for their offensive line. No losses, which is a good thing. And they also add bringing in Emmanuel Pregnon, the one pick they made that was probably viewed by consensus as a steal in this controversial Jags draft. I also liked Emmanuel Pregnon. Think it was a really nice pick, and he alone is enough to at least say slightly upgraded to the offensive line, even if Pregnon isn't slated into the starting lineup for now. But that's a good problem to have because the Jags, while this offensive line really doesn't have any star talent, they are very balanced and performed really well last year. And their rankings now find themselves pretty close to the middle of the pack as my 18th ranked overall offensive line for the upcoming season, at least heading in. And in that big middling cluster of kind of indistinguishably good pass blocking units, which is as high as 9th all the way down through 18th. And then a little bit lower, a tick below that for run blocking, where they rank 19th. So we can just go left to right with this 18th ranked overall offensive line. And at left tackle, the prominent starter here should be Cole Van Lanen, though he does right now head into camp on the PUP list, which I know Jags fans are looking at this like, you have got to be kidding me. He, no joke, suffers a knee injury in week 18, the day after he signs a 3-year, $51 million contract extension here. And that did ultimately take him out of that playoff game against the Bills. So just really bad luck of the draw. Hopefully, this is nothing and maybe so much as just precaution for someone that they just gave a really nice contract extension to. But all knee injuries can be a little bit scary. So right now it's just more something to monitor, but I think they're optimistic that even if he misses the first couple of games, they should be able to get him rolling. And he's a really fun story. He was a day 3 pick by the Green Bay Packers, a team that is kind of synonymous with, developing especially like Big Ten offensive linemen on day 3, let alone athletic Wisconsin offensive linemen. For whatever reason, the Packers actually hate players out of Wisconsin, and Van Lanen was someone that found himself departing from Green Bay and developing here in Jacksonville, where he's been kind of a swingman and moved around. He's played some guard, he's played some tackle, and he did that last year too. He played some guard, but eventually really settled in at left tackle, and he's just turned into a nice player. And you could actually argue for the up arrow on Cole Van Lanen. I think that would be reasonable. I mean, he has traits. He tested really well coming out. He can definitely move on tape. He's not a twig. Like, I wouldn't say his play strength is elite or anything like that, but he definitely has like good, solid plus traits across the board. So it's practical to say that he will continue to get at least a little bit better than, say, this 76 rating. I do think the contract they gave him is largely representative of just a really solid starting tackle, about $17 million a year. And having that guard flexibility is really nice. He's just a really nice, athletic, balanced player that they've found and developed nicely. Now, a reason I'm less worried about his injury and especially if he's going to miss a few games, as long as he's able to get back healthy when they do return to him. A reason I'm less worried about it is they do have Walker Little, who right now is probably the most expensive backup lineman in the NFL. And they actually paid him kind of on a similar timeline as like a Cole Van Lanen, where they kind of paid him maybe a little bit early, hoping he gets a little bit better. It didn't necessarily go in a positive direction with Walker Little. He just has stalled out and frankly regressed a little bit and just taken a lot of losses as a pass blocker, especially. He's never been a great run blocker, but he's, as a backup tackle, there's a reason he was paid at a certain point in time. He's still a pretty reliable backup, and even has maybe started to like flirt with the idea of playing a little bit of guard as well. So he just might be the most valuable sixth man of the year for offensive linemen around the NFL, which is an extremely underrated role. Just to have someone that could plug in potentially at 4 offensive line spots in the event of a likely injury. Almost every offensive line sees somebody go down. Walker Little's not a superstar, but I would expect he's able to at least keep the foundations from sinking. So I like that he's here. They couldn't really cut him. That contract is still pretty steep, so they might as well keep him as a valuable backup. So if he's got to play a few games to start the season at left tackle, doesn't really change my outlook all that much, if at all. And then at left guard, you have Ezra Cleveland, who has rebounded nicely here. Found a nice fit back in a scheme that really leans into his athletic ability. The Jags running a lot of pin and pull, toss, wide zone. Ezra Cleveland is a ultra athletic guard. He's a weapon as a move blocker. That athleticism does come at the price of play strength, though I think he's developed nicely with his anchor over the years. He had some really low lows in pass protection, and he has settled down much nicer here in Jacksonville in time. So he's just a nice, solid, athletic left guard. Him and Van Lanen next to each other make a lot of sense. These guys are very similar overall players. Then you have Robert Hainsey, veteran center, just really valuable for his experience and ability to call out blitzes and keep things in check. He's pretty athletic to get to his landmarks as a run blocker, definitely lighter in terms of play strength, and that anchor can really be challenged in pass protection. Not the most forceful people mover in the run game, but he can tap into that athleticism and steer guys out of the way as a run blocker. Another solid piece. At right guard, you have your weak link right now, which is Patrick Mekari. Now, they are paying Patrick Mekari a lot of money, and that is the biggest reason why he's likely to be their starting right guard. They gave him a 3-year, $37 million contract, and there's a lot of real money. 22 and a half of that guaranteed, and this is one of those contracts where I don't really get why they put a potential out in there. I think that deceives a lot of fans with these contracts, because some of these potential outs, it's like, yeah, you can cut them and there's no dead cap. Some of them, they're just forcing it in there. And this is one of those contracts. Like, he still has $10 million of dead cap after this year. Yeah, they'll likely cut him and not face an $18 million cap hit next year, but I wouldn't call that an out. Like, that's not a very good contract, to be honest, for what Patrick Mekari has been. But contract aside, he's about a bottom of the barrel starting guard. He's had much better years in pass protection than what he did last year, where he took a lot of losses. Very different scheme, going from a north and south Ravens offense to what they were doing here in more of a Shanahan style world. That could have something to do with it. Could be that he's actually more comfortable as a tackle than a guard, where he's probably played some better play at tackle throughout his career than at guard. But I'll be honest, that 72 pass block rating I put on him for this series is largely his history doing a lot of heavy lifting, because he played at a level last year that I think if he does that again, which again is not consistent with the 3 or 4 years before that, where he was much more solid. You're hoping for a bounce back year, but this is kind of where that yellow arrow enters the equation and the potential downside. Like, I actually think this year could be a year where they open up the opportunity for other guys to take this job at right guard. Yes, they still have a lot of guaranteed money on that contract, but last year that would have looked really bad if they did it last year. This year, it's more like, we'll make it work, right? So we talked about Walker Little as a potential option there and potentially being better than Patrick Mekari. You also have 2 recent third-round picks that I really liked. Wyatt Milam, really fun prospect. Some of that Wyatt Teller in there, not because of the first name, but just that giant upper half, nasty in the run game, loves to play offensive line, which sounds stupid, but not all these guys enjoy the concept of going out and try to beat up other 300-pound men 65, 70 times a game. Wyatt Milam did that at West Virginia and actually had a lockdown season in pass protection his final year. I thought he was a really good value. They didn't really have a need for him last year, but when he did play in little spots, he looked like he was capable. So to me, he's really fascinating. I know with certainty he has a better upside than Patrick Mekari, who to me very much is what he is in the sense of like, he doesn't have a very high upside. He might bounce back this year and be better than he played last year, but overall, eventually you're going to want someone else over Patrick Mekari. And then there's Emmanuel Pregnon, who is a really just kind of smooth criminal of an offensive lineman, sticky hands, really good at staying square in pass pro, full-size dude, good play strength, not a great athlete, and I suspect that's why he fell. These teams love the concept of upside and athleticism, and Pregnon is 24 years old. Maybe he's never going to be a superstar. And I wouldn't say his upside is as high as maybe Wyatt Milam. But I love his floor. And if Mekari's struggling, it's hard for me to not look at some really good depth here. Like, this is some of the best O-line depth that we have and will discuss in this series. It's hard for me to not see them being able to kind of swap out that chess piece and see if it could be better off with someone else when we're talking about their weakest link in Patrick Mekari, who's already not the end of the world as your weakest link. And then you have the best player here, the guy that's closest to being considered a star, and that would be Anton Harrison, their first-round pick from, let's see, I think he's had 3 years in the league, so #math, that would mean 2023 draft. Checking, and yes, I'm not an idiot. I got it right. So heading into year 4 for Anton Harrison, he has been, I think, right on his trajectory as the 28th pick in the draft, was not a perfect tackle prospect, but was a pretty damn good one, belonged in the first round, really athletic, that just needed to kind of beef up, clean up some of his glitches in technique. And he's been doing that. And he had his best year in pass protection, just as the year before was better than his rookie year. So he's absolutely on that proper trajectory that you hope for when you spend a first-round pick on a tackle. And yeah, I think he can continue to get better year by year and eventually be like, I don't know, we don't need to go crazy here, but be just a top 10 tackle, someone that this team pays $25, $26 million a year, if not more by the time they do pay him, and you're happy with that. I think especially the growth in his play strength and in a new run blocking system, like having more impactful games as a run blocker, because he's always had those movement skills, but has always struggled to consistently connect as a run blocker, and we're starting to get there with him. So he's the biggest piece of upside along with some of those young guards, especially like could him and Wyatt Milam be a really awesome pairing someday? I know we're pretty far ways away from that with Milam, but I still believe in the guy. Like, I could see him and Harrison together being really fun. So to me, that's where room for growth comes in. But overall, and we still got a couple other depth pieces to talk about, but overall, like, this is an offensive line to me that raises the floor. It's a very solid unit. They will allow this offense to do what they want to do in both phases, pass blocking and run blocking. They have a little bit of room to get a little bit better than the 18th O-line. Maybe they can finish 14th. Best case scenario, Milam and Harrison are superstars and you're creeping into the top 10. But this is fortunately not like a lot of these other offensive lines where you lack depth, you've got a bunch of question marks, you have maybe multiple weak links, even if you have superstars. It's just not a very volatile offensive line. How many of these O-lines get that wild card icon next to it? This one doesn't. I feel really good about what they have. Now, we already said, like, they have 3 very intriguing depth pieces. They also have, like, more. Like, Chuma Edoga as an 8th piece, okay. Like, he's very inconsistent. He's had a couple good starts at tackle in his career. Jonah Monheim was drafted last year Probably a career backup center, but he got some starts under his belt last year. They weren't great, but could have looked worse for a rookie 7th rounder. So should see some incremental growth from him as well. And even Tristan Colon, I don't know if he'll make this team, so don't want to spend much time on him, but like he had a really rough year going to Detroit last year, but he was kind of an ascending guy developing out of the Ravens, offensive line factory for a couple of years there. So maybe an emergency situation, you could have a worse number 10 offensive lineman on your team. But yeah, really solid unit to round out this offense. So for me, the Jaguars did come out as the 16th ranked overall offense heading into the year, ranking higher as a passing unit where they're 12th. But I hinted at it earlier, their run game is going to come in lower than where they actually finished last year, where they started off as like a top 5 or 6 run game. By season's end, they were, probably 12 to 16 if you were really lining them all up. They got to replace Travis Etienne there. And that's gonna be a hit. I also don't think this is like an elite run blocking unit or anything like that to like really drive this thing forward and make it like truly interchangeable. I do think Travis Etienne created a fair amount here. So their projections are maybe a little bit more split than how the Jags actually were last year, where this was a really balanced offense. Obviously, Liam Cohen's goal is to get back to that. We'll see if they can do that with some gains with that running back room and in the run game. But I would say their floor as a passing game is much higher. Yeah, there were weeks where this was probably a top 12 passing game, but they had a lot of weeks of serious frustration with their ability to throw the football. That should be largely cleaned up, just with how we talked about how the floor with the pass catchers is just higher here. But just overall, largely good, reasonable offense, if not standout, incredible good, without some further green lights getting hit here. Now, let's switch over to this Jaguars defense. Really an impressive, I would even say surprisingly good defense last year. So let's go through this thing and talk about their chances of repeating that and potentially even exceeding what they were last year. So we'll start up front with the defensive line, where it was mostly just like minor shakeup. They are definitely going with more of a youth movement in terms of like the depth pieces. So, they say goodbye to a rotational Austin Johnson, Dwayne Smoot, Emmanuel Ogba. That's a combined like 90 years between those 3 guys. They did trade Mason Smith for Ruka Rororo, so that's more of a youth flip, if you will. Pretty close to a neutral, in my opinion. And then they draft Albert Regis on the interior of the D-line in the 3rd round. And then off the edge on day 3, they draft Wesley Williams out of Duke and Zach Durfee out of Washington. And really the one guy I think being anything close to like a notable impact for this year there would be Albert Regis. Not really worried about the Mason Smith or Austin Johnson losses. So I did say slightly upgraded on the interior of the D-line, and I would say Rook is currently better than Mason Smith as well, even though they're both recent 2nd-round draft busts. The edge room is neutral. I mean, Smoot and Ogba were not good. They've had better years in the past for sure, so I don't think they're worried about it. But I'm not, Wesley Williams or Zach Durfee, I'm not going to like write home about that. So I did say neutral at edge. So overall, with pretty minimal sort of changing of gravity, if you will, with the defensive line, they're largely running it back with the same starters and some different rotational pieces. And things could be worse. This is a good defensive line. They rank right in the middle of the league for me, 16th to 17th for overall D-line, and pretty steady in terms of both pass rush and run defense, 14th to 18th in that tier there, right in the middle in terms of NFL pass rushes, and then 15th to 18th for D-line run defense. So really just good, solid, balanced overall defensive line here. Everything kind of makes sense. You've got a legitimate number 1, which is awesome. Josh Hines-Allen bounced back last year after complicated and confusing 2024 season where they had him bulk up and, he wasn't able to be himself. Definitely got back to being himself. a pressure machine, really good at, firing off the edge, the cross chop, the swipes, the speed to threaten the top of the tackle's drop. He is really good at making the quarterback uncomfortable by getting on top of his block quickly and oftentimes defeating it. He also has a good bull rush, really good inside counters. Like, he's the whole package as a rusher. He really is. He's developed his game so nicely, and he's an awesome run defender. He is the definition of a true game-changing number one edge rusher, even if he's not quite on the dominance efficiency, I would say, of like your, Will Anderson, Micah Parsons, obviously Myles Garrett, like those true defensive player of the years. Like, that's kind of your tier one of edge rushers. Hines Allen's in like a tier two of number one edge rushers, if that makes sense. But very complete, very awesome, great starting point. And then Trayvon Walker gets to be the number two here, which is really a healthy role for Trayvon Walker. And every year I go in with an open mind on Trayvon Walker. I've been really hard on, this number 101 draft pick, gone at it with Jags fans, like called him fraudulent at times, called him overrated. Like, every year I do try to go in with an open mind and try to see if I'm wrong. And every year when I kind of do that dive into his film, it just feels like he's getting incrementally better each year. To me, still a guy that like doesn't win as often as you would hope that a number one pick in the draft with like this dude's physical comparison is Myles Garrett, right? Like, has he been a smash hit as the first pick in the draft? Like, I think some Jags fans think he is. To me, it's an obvious no. However, he has gotten better. I think this year was the best I've felt about his bull rush, which should be his bread and butter. This scheme, this coaching staff also was much more creative to like get him opportunities over guards and let him just kind of out athlete guards and pick some matchups a little bit more. And he actually showed, some quickness and some finesse in those opportunities that we haven't necessarily seen him in that more like stagnant, just heavy-handed rush off the edge, able to open up that mindset a little bit more. So we saw, I think, more consistent bull rush, some more creative ways for him to win. Yet again, excellent run defender. That was never going to be a question with him, and he brings that to the table. That's great. And this is the first year I'm not going to call Trayvon Walker overrated. I think we're far enough removed from him being the number one pick in the draft. I don't really see Jags fans overhyping him or trying to preach him as something he's not. And the other thing is, like, the last couple of years, there was always that like kind of pending contract looming, knowing that he had some like, honestly, like bonus sack production. And sorry to like victory lap on Jags fans, but he always had a lot of like extra cleanup sacks. His raw sack total when he like reached the double-digit sack marks never really matched his win rate or the pressure rate. That's why we talk about pressure rate and win rate, because over time it's going to project sacks. And this year he went from a guy that's historically had pretty good sack luck to really bad sack luck. He had 3.5 sacks last year, and that's probably why a lot of people aren't talking about him, but that's not a huge surprise. And I'm not gonna freak out about that or victory lap and be like, oh my God, this guy only had 3.5 sacks. I think he actually had his best year as a pass rusher, at least incrementally better than the year before and the year before that. And I think he's also helped by the fact that like Jalen Phillips got $30 million a year. Odafe Owe got $25 million a year. The cap keeps going up and up and up. And I thought, this is what I was gonna say, is I thought because he was the number one pick, because he is technically getting better every year, I thought the Jags were going to get kind of like handicapped into having to give him a crazy like $35 to $40 million a year contract. I did. But the dust kind of settled here, and the contract's not bad. It's really not. Like, I would say I still wouldn't love to pay a player like this quite this much money, but I can stomach it and not really have to hate on it or sweat it all that much. 4 years, $110 million. That's 27.5 on average. but only 50 of that is guaranteed, and those are guaranteed in the first 2 years of the contract. He doesn't exceed a $15 million cap hit until 2028, and then 2028, 2029, he climbs up north of $30 million against the cap. A little bit more stomachable, if that's a word, digestible, if you will, knowing that the cap's only going to go up. And to be fair, Trayvon Walker gets like incrementally better every year. So 28, 29 years old, he might actually be, a really, really good player at that point. And especially as long as he gets to be the Robin to Josh Hines Allen as the Batman, I'm cool with it. So I'm hoping, Jags fans, we don't have to beef over Trayvon Walker, at least for the next year or so. Now, if he goes out and gets like a 20-sack season on 40 pressures, things can change. But it's a really nice 1-2 punch. I would say the edge duo is a top 10 edge duo in the NFL. Now, they rank a little bit lower than that as an overall D-line. You can probably guess why, because the interior I have more questions about. So Eric Armstead was kind of a question mark to be brought back last year, period. He was signed by the old regime, but they didn't really have anybody else that can rush the passer from the interior. They kind of played him out of scheme in that 2024 season. So they wanted to see what they could get from him in his age 32 going on 33-year-old season. And he bounced back to an extent. He was definitely a good fit in the scheme that likes these more, just good athletes that can afford to be a little bit lankier. And Armstead's always kind of been in that hybrid mold, but this is a defense that loves to run stunts and loops and allow these guys to be a little bit lighter up front. So like he was a fit as a 3-tech, as a 4-eye, and was just an overall useful player. Anytime that's kind of your role, to be a looper and a stunt man, you're going to get some extra pressures, just that the scheme racks up for you. And I think as the year went on, we didn't really see him win a whole lot of reps one-on-one. We saw it earlier in the year, but I'm a little bit worried for a guy that's dealt with as many injuries as he has, that is now 33 years old. I'm a little bit worried that a full-time role caught up with him and he tapered off. So like, I definitely think he's regressing. That's not controversial. They needed to keep him again because they don't really have anybody else. And that's obviously like that statement right there can show you how you go from a top 10 edge duo to, okay, you're actually more of like the 16th best overall defensive line, because that's the best they have to work with, is a regressing Eric Armstead that maybe does need to be in more of a rotational role at this point just to keep him fresh and healthy. And it's not like he's out there dominating one-on-one reps or controlling the line of scrimmage as a run defender, even when he is 100%. He's just a pretty good player. Beyond that, you have Devon Hamilton, he's a good nose tackle. He's a best thing they have going for their interior run defense. He plays his role. He's useful. I like what he does in that sense, but definitely a one-dimensional player. He doesn't have the twitch, very inconsistent bull rush. It's just minor flashes. You might see him create some drive and have some good pass rush moments, but just kind of one of those guys, the big stocky earlier down presence who's had a nice bounce back here. He's still a nice player, but a lot of guys have players like Devon Hamilton that are more third or fourth pieces. And I think in an ideal situation, neither him or Armstead would be full-time starters. And the thing is, their depth is super questionable. So they actually really have to count on these guys. Albert Regis is a third-round pick, decent prospect. I had him as an early day 3 guy, but not going to really complain about him going in the third. But that draft capital is typically consistent with like, we need an impact from you sooner rather than later. Regis was a good, like, high energy, high motor run defender, but he's really undersized and he doesn't really offer much as a pass rusher. So where does that leave him? Well, I think the scheme fits good and they'll be able to move him around and he should be able to get some good pass rush production on just loops and using that athletic profile. But there's we've seen guys like this, and there's a pretty good chance he gets to the league, and a lot of the stuff that he's used to as a run defender doesn't work against NFL offensive linemen. And yeah, he played at the SEC, but that's still a massive jump. I mean, it's hard as hell to defend the run under 300 pounds as a defensive tackle. I'm giving him a chance to show that he can do that, but it's hard to count on that with as much as they're going to have to count on him, I think, as a core part of their rotation. They go get Ruka Ro. Again, I think they won that trade with the Falcons. Like, a Ro is athletic. He talk about getting like manufactured production. You go and watch his pressures and it's like, all right, he had final decent numbers, but almost all these are like the scheme. Like, he's just standing up and running around the center after the other guy, or either the other guy blew up the guy that he's looping around, or they just blew the assignment. So it's like, yep, he can do that. He's athletic and can stand up and run, but a lot more to being a good defensive tackle than that. And as a run defender, it was unwatchable, right? So like, they gave up on Mason Smith. I get it. They're just done with him and he hasn't really developed. Mason Smith has a higher upside than Ruka Ro, but I'm not really projecting this to be a big win of a trade. Maybe they surprise, it could happen and he could learn how to be a more consistent run defender on a different defense. But and even as a pass rusher, like, there's not really a stable bull rush or a lot of moves that he goes to. He's just quick, right? There's a time and place for that. Ideally, as like your fifth piece that you're kind of putting in certain packages, not, again, depth that you might have to count on. Matt Dickerson's bounced around. He's had a long, extra large cup of coffee in the NFL. He's decent enough rotational depth, I suppose. But it's a bad interior D line. It is, especially if Eric Armstead is really trending down. You could potentially be in trouble there. Luckily, though, that edge duo can pick you up a good bit. And then you do have Dennis Gardeck is another like decent depth piece. He plays that strong side kind of linebacker. He's like half edge, half linebacker. You'll see him at times actually playing off ball. More often than not, though, he's on the line. I think it was over 80% of his snaps were on the ball, and he had more pass rush snaps than run defense snaps or coverage snaps. But he kind of does a little bit of everything for this defense. He's a nice, just kind of chess piece that Anthony Campanile has found a nice way to use him. So like, he'll make, he'll have his stamp in different spots, but kind of a jack of all trades, master of none type. Wesley Williams, really good crasher for loops off the edge. Tested really poorly, but I think his first step on the field plays better. Fourth round was early for me, but I get it if they're really just like, all right, we have our starting four, but if we're into our depth, it's just going to be like, I feel like their game plan is like, okay, our first hockey line are our starters. And then our second line, we're just going to come out here with a bunch of athletes. And even if you have a pretty good chance of beating the shit out of us because we're undersized and just not good, we're just going to run a bunch of stunts and loops and muddy shit up and hopefully confuse you or out athlete you. I feel like that's what they're going for here, because that was Wesley Williams. He didn't really like look where he was going or have a lot of pass rush moves. He just kind of, Duke just asked him to fire off the ball, crash inside, and muddy shit up. And he was pretty good at that. It was the one thing he did. Led to, relative usefulness in both phases, pass rush and run defense. So I see what they're going for there. Super hyper specific role player that probably wasn't going to go in the fourth round, but they go that route. They have a couple of like lowly undrafted types. Danny Strigow, BJ Green had to play last year, and they held their own for what they are. And Zach Durfee, another guy that tested really well at Washington, but really didn't do anything else. So they're targeting athletes on the D-line, whether it's Durfee. Williams is like a specific guy for stunts. Even if he's not athletic, he can open things up for these other athletes to loop in behind what he blows up. Regis, very athletic. Ro, very athletic. That's where the coach and scheme grade comes into play. But on an individual player assessment standpoint, there just is not a lot behind the four starters that gets me excited here. Pair that with the fact that your two interior D-line guys are pretty major questions for me in terms of, are they legitimate impacts compared to what other teams have to work with at that group? And it brings you down more into the middle of the pack, despite your edge duo being really quite nice. Overall, though, there are much worse defensive lines in the league. We saw largely this same group lead to a really good defense last year, and they should be able to get something close to that, give or take a little more or a little less. But let's go to the next level of the defense at linebacker, where we are going to see the other big loss that this team has chosen to, I guess, be comfortable with this offseason, with All-Pro Devin Lloyd leaving for Carolina. And like Travis Etienne, not a massive contract. I feel like the Jags probably could have kept him if they wanted to, but they elect to let him go. They don't really do much to replace him. They draft Parker Hughes, another off the beaten path 7th round pick that no one had ever really heard of, but definitely downgraded on paper at linebacker. However, I will say I get where the Jags are kind of coming from here, because Ventrell Miller, who will be tasked with stepping in to Devin Lloyd's shoes, is really fun. And kind of like I said with Parker Washington, probably someone that I feel like I should probably celebrate a little bit more, just as someone that I really did like in that draft, called him a sleeper pick for the Jags. And I think the analysis at the time was like, well, he doesn't really have a path to get on the field because they had Lloyd, they had Chad Muma was still in development, Oluokun was here. My analysis of the pick was like, he's just such a good player that eventually, hopefully he works out. And that's kind of what we've seen here. He's kind of outlasted everybody else other than Oluokun. Now, obviously, he doesn't cost what Devin Lloyd did, but he played really nice last year in a rotational role. And I compared him to this player coming out, and I still see that guy when I watch Ventrell Miller's tape. Anybody that's familiar with Denzel Perriman, Ventrell Miller's the same guy. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, pretty stiff, but loves to hit. Kind of like we said about those offensive linemen with Wyatt Milam, like you want a guy that just enjoys what he gets to do for a living. That's Ventrell Miller. And Denzel Perriman, if he didn't get hurt so much, and this play style can lead to some extra injuries, I'm not going to say he was like a Hall of Famer or anything like that, but he's someone that would have gotten a lot more public respect if not for the injuries. But I do see someone in Ventrell Miller that can fill 80% of what Devin Lloyd gave this team. I really think so. I mean, and we're starting here because he's the more fascinating guy. We'll get to Oluokun. He's really good. But Ventrell Miller, I think could be this year actually an even better run defender than Devin Lloyd. And I talked about this in the Panthers deep dive, but when I did a deep dive into Devin Lloyd's tape, I actually was pretty underwhelmed by the down-to-down run defense for him. His consistency in getting off blocks, not that he was bad as a run defender, but was much more of a splash play run defender. Ventrell Miller, I really think down to down when he got to play last year, more consistent, more aggressive to get in offensive line's faces, better at that quick trigger, shooting gaps, making more impact stops at the line. And I think when they have such a smart veteran complete presence in Foye Oluokun to be the do-it-all guy next to him, I think that's largely what they asked Devin Lloyd to do as a run defender, and he was pretty good at it, but I think Ventrell Miller can be as good, if not better, as a run defender this year. He's just less proven. Now, the coverage side of things is where I was impressed with Devin Lloyd, and you will probably witness a trade-off, not paying for that linebacker, and not getting the amount of pass breakups, instinctive interceptions, some of those game-changing moments that this Jags defense did benefit from, especially earlier last year. Now, those can be a little bit fluky, and I also understand why the Jags are kind of betting against another year of 9 pass breakups or whatever for Devin Lloyd. And it's not like Ventrell Miller has no instincts in coverage, and it's also not like Devin Lloyd is a freak mover of a coverage player. So you're going to get a similar athlete in terms of someone that actually doesn't have a lot of range, ability to man guys up, Miller is an instinctive player, and it's not like he's never had pass breakups before. He's got some moments. Even last year, he had 2 passes defended on 110 coverage snaps. But let's just say you get 60% of what Devin Lloyd brought to the table as a coverage player and as much as a run defender, but you get that for pennies on the dollar. Yeah, I can understand that, especially when you already have a Foye Oluokun next to him. So while we pointed out, like, yep, Devin Lloyd's a loss on paper, Ventrell Miller's got to go out and prove it. He's only played 700 snaps in his whole career. I do like Ventrell Miller, and I think he can really break through and actually be one of the nicer LB2s in the league. And then you have Foye Oluokun. I don't need to spend as much time on him. I mean, he's been just an awesome, steady hand really since the Jags signed him. He was a really good bet by Trent Baalke in the previous regime, and he's carried over to this new defense, and I thought wore this new scheme brilliantly. And he actually, while Devin Lloyd had as productive of a year in coverage as he did, that led to that all-pro season, Oluokun actually had a career high in passes defended as well, at 7. And ultimately, too, like, Anthony Campanile definitely needs to be mentioned as one of the 3 best linebacker coaches in the NFL. Top 2, top 1. I mean, with what he did with the guys in Green Bay and has already started to show he can do here, I trust his judgment on a guy like Ventrell Miller. And even some of these other developmental depth pieces that we'll talk about here. But I didn't mention it earlier. Even despite the loss of Devin Lloyd, I have the Jags ranking 9th for overall linebacker. They're still inside the top 10 for a linebacker run defense, 6th to 10th. And the coverage is 10th to 14th, where that, like, if they still had Devin Lloyd, they might be 1 or 2 for coverage. So that's the main difference. Maybe a little bit worse for run defense. They would almost certainly be a top 5 overall linebacker unit, but I'm excited to watch Ventrell Miller is what I'm getting at here. I think he's going to be pretty good. And then you have kind of a motley crew of a depth chart. You have Dennis Gardeck, who we mentioned. He's not going to be like, you know, if Foye or Miller get hurt, I don't think it's, okay, Dennis Gardeck, you're the starting linebacker now. I think Gardeck has his role as the do-it-all Sam linebacker. Jack Kaiser would be the theoretical floor raiser of a depth piece. Really no standout traits, but adequate across the board in terms of run diagnostics and knowing what he's doing. As far as young linebackers are concerned, he's heading into year 2 here. And then you have these 3 just athletic, you know, let's see what maybe the best linebacker coach in the league can do with Yasir Abdullah, who's been around here for a good bit now, but he was an edge in college, as was Jalen McLeod. And then Parker Hughes, who gets drafted in the 7th round, someone I was not familiar with, out of Middle Tennessee State, but did run, I think, a 4.4 flat. So that's going to put you on the radar for sure. So 3 guys that it's like, okay, there's really not a whole lot to write home about. I did think Jalen McLeod, I did watch him at Auburn. I did think he was really good at getting off blocks off the edge, but obviously as a position change conversion, it's just hard to know exactly what you're going to get, but like fascinating for sure. Same with Yasir Abdullah, like same idea, just like has, you know, fits the athletic profile, but just has to learn the position. And yeah, Parker Hughes. So if any of those guys developed here under Campanile, I wouldn't be stunned, but entirely unproven as far as depth. So it's a very good linebacker room still, even after letting Devin Lloyd go. And perhaps that's a pleasant surprise for Jags fans to hear me say that and not be like freaking out over the loss of Devin Lloyd. I think they're going to be okay. I do. Let's talk about this secondary and round out this defense. So as far as offseason changes go, they really didn't do much in the secondary. Very minimal losses where it's just Andrew Wingard, who did start 86% of their snaps. You could argue that's addition by subtraction. He really fell off last year. And then as far as additions, it's Travis Hunter coming back from injury, playing cornerback, a veteran depth add in Dane Jackson. With that, I did say upgraded at corner. Like, they get Travis Hunter, to be a full-time corner here. That's major. He only played 14% of snaps as a corner last year. That should go way up. And then at safety, they are adding some prospects in Jalen Husky, who was a third-round pick, and Caleb Ransaw, who was a third-round pick in 2025's draft, but missed the entire season. So getting some intrigue in terms of depth. I said neutral at safety, though, as far as 2026 impact is concerned. So after, I think, 4 or 5 straight deep dives of secondaries that happened to land in that big middle cluster for my secondary rankings, which is, I think, 16th to 25th, where it's really hard to distinguish a notable difference and take any of those and put them in a different tier, we finally have one that is above that big middle cluster, and that is this Jags secondary, which kind of reminds me of their offensive line a little bit, where their floor is really nice, and there's not really a weak link involved, at least with their starters, and they have pretty good depth relative to other NFL secondaries, especially at cornerback with someone like Jerry Jones, who we'll talk about. But there is a little bit more upside with this secondary. If we're comparing it just to the offensive line, like we said, okay, Anton Harrison maybe can become more of a star. Obviously, Travis Hunter just might have a little bit of star potential. And then they also have Antonio Johnson, who's going to be a fun conversation here, but a really nice starting point with a lot of arrows pointing up. But there are a couple older players here as well that got to stay kind of on top of their game as well. But let's begin with Travis Hunter. And we obviously talked a decent bit about like their strategy and the fact that he's going to be a full-time corner now. And that I like that as a plan. Even if I viewed him a little bit higher as a wide receiver prospect than a corner prospect, still saw incredible upside for him. And just kind of thinking back to like my cornerback evaluation, because we saw so little of him. What did we show? 14% of snaps? Yeah, 14%. Like we saw so little of him. We can definitely still refer to like my write-up on him as a college corner. The fact that he has elite ball skills for a wide receiver prospect, that's obviously rare for a corner. So just even if he's beat, his recovery and ability to find the ball and have these game-changing plays, Derek Stingley kind of has that right now. There's some Derek Stingley in there with Travis Hunter where Stingley's not always perfect in his coverage. He's not. That's obviously a pretty damn good player to have some comparisons to, but that's just like as a starting point, really a good, unique part of his upside. As an overall athlete, like he has those fluid hips, he's got really good speed. I never thought Travis Hunter was like an elite speed kind of guy, kind of like 4.38, 4.4 type of stuff. Like I always thought his just more body control and change of direction and his natural athleticism was more impressive than just the sheer explosiveness for him. And like that fluid, oily athleticism absolutely helps him at corner, but he does have to be a little bit more careful in terms of vertical stack and separation. Like there were times on his college tape where he would play overconfident, honestly, and just trust his recovery a little bit too much. And there were a lot of moments on tape where he would actually allow a lot of separation over the top, but a lot of the opponents he would go against either were too afraid to test him or just weren't even, looking that way at all. That's not uncommon for college offenses to just not push the ball downfield. And Travis Hunter knew that. So like, there's definitely a balance to be found in terms of not sitting on everything underneath and like not letting that be something that NFL passers can take advantage of and NFL wide receivers. And that was definitely more of a just like note on his tape and something he's going to have to adjust to as opposed to an actual weakness. But it was always something that stood out to me on his tape. And I also thought just like within his route running, and this was to be expected, someone that legitimately played both sides of the ball, his route running was a little bit sloppy, lean, dependent on his athleticism a little bit more than deceptiveness and snap. I thought the same applied in his man-to-man technique, where he would get a little bit grabby at the top of breaks, stop his feet a little bit. I thought snappier route runners were going to be able to create man-to-man separation on him. Now, the Jags don't project as a team that's going to run a ton of man coverage. I thought Travis Hunter's zone was potentially just like Hall of Fame type of stuff, because not only does he have these great ball skills and these great instincts and all that, but he's also just like really smart and puts in time in the film room. And here now getting like more full-time prep with the defense, we could see some really special stuff in terms of baiting QBs. Like his ability to play that high-low, whether it's in cover 2 or a cover 3 curl flat, quarters assignments, you get your opportunities to do that. His ability to kind of feel that space, defend 2 routes at once, and bait quarterbacks into mistakes, really special. So I really like the scheme fit now that we've really seen what they want to run schematically. I'm really excited for especially the full-time corner stuff here. I think it's really going to work. And perhaps if you're talking about, well, we're going to miss out on a couple extra turnovers from Devin Lloyd, Travis Hunter could double that difference. There's not a lot of cornerbacks where I say this guy could consistently get you 6+ interceptions a year. I don't think that's crazy to expect that with Travis Hunter with his combination of skills. So really excited to see him. He's still got to go out and prove it and show that he's not a guy that maybe will lose a little bit more from a like down-to-down coverage standpoint. But I also should say, like, he did look really good in the very few amount of snaps that we got to see from him, which also reinforces my belief that he's going to be awesome this year and ultimately be the best addition that this team made this offseason, is just getting him back healthy and locked into a full-time starting role, at least on one side of the ball, and then go make a little splash on the offense once or twice a game like we talked about. So really fun starting point there, but your cornerback room is one of the deeper ones in the league. Jordan Lewis, really nice signing last year. Great start, got hurt, didn't finish as strong. Largely as advertised, though, you kind of knew what you were signing as a guy that had played as much as he had in Dallas. Week to week coverage consistency can ebb and flow from him, but someone that if he plays a lot of zone coverage, whether he's in the slot or outside, high IQ guy, good ball skills, some of that ability to bait quarterbacks and make breaks on balls and surprise you at times. Just good balanced player, physical run defender, versatile, nice signing, but he is getting a little bit older. He's on the other side of 30 now, dealt with some injuries last year, so you want to see him be able to keep it up. And then Monteric Brown got a 3-year, $30 million contract extension here and he's a survivor, man. 7th round pick in 2022, comes into the league understanding he's going to have to constantly prove it. They're going to constantly try to replace me. They're going to draft Travis Hunter and, Tyson Campbell, I think would have been that same draft class, right? 2022. Go trade for Greg Newsome, sign Jordan Lewis. You have to have like years of established play to like defend a starting job as a 7th round pick. Monteric Brown incrementally got opportunities throughout those years, hanging around his depth. And then last year, I think really solidified himself and got that big contract. It reminds me so much of some of these lesser physically gifted zone corners that, aren't going to be like lockdown man-to-man guys, but will make plays, use their length and instincts to just be good in these zone assignments. So you're looking at like Mike Jackson and what he's done in Carolina. Rasul Douglas comes to mind. To a higher extent, I would say like a Christian Benford, who was also in that 2022 draft, by the way. But he fits in really nicely as a complement to Travis Hunter. You got you have like 3 really good smart zone corners. So eventually this team might become more of a man-to-man team. I don't think that's going to really happen this year. These guys do what they do and do it well, and should have all these guys more, healthy and tuned in together this year, which I really like. And that's a core reason why, even if none of these guys are superstars, and Hunter might be, very quickly. There's not a whole lot of cornerback trios that give you the floor these guys do. Even if Hunter hasn't proven it yet. I mean, there is a certain floor there with Travis Hunter, even despite the lack of playing time, just given who he was as a prospect. But you also have Jarrian Jones, who the way I see this is Jarrian Jones is just waiting until Jordan Lewis's job becomes available for him. And there were times last year where it did when Lewis got hurt, and Jarrian Jones looks like a really good draft steal for the Jags. Great instincts, excellent first step, ball skills, physical guy, very Jordan Lewis-y. Might even be better than him right now because he might be more athletic than him right now. But because they're paying Lewis, the respect of a veteran, team captain, that kind of stuff, it will be Lewis as long as these guys are all healthy. But Jarrian Jones will sneak in there in dime packages, and there's probably not a better dime back in the league than Jarrian Jones, because in those dime rolls, you can be so aggressive, especially if it's a curl flat or a hook zone, because you usually have extra DBs around you in deeper coverage. It's the old Patrick Robinson role in those Dennis Allen defenses where it's like, hey, just go lurk, use your instincts, bait the QB, go make us some plays. There might not be a better D-back in the league right now for that specific role. And I think Jarrian Jones only has room to improve his consistency in coverage and settle into literally Jordan Lewis's role, where it's like you're our nickel, you can place him outside if need be. Genuinely one of the best CB4s in the league right now, and I was really impressed by him after I was a little more, cold on him as a draft prospect. I liked him better than Jammie Robinson, who was his predecessor at Florida State in the same role. Everybody loved Jammie Robinson. Everybody loved Jarrian Jones. I was at least closer to consensus on Jarrian Jones. Anyway, just rehashing old draft takes at this point. But you got Dane Jackson. Speaking of old draft takes, I once upon a time loved him as a day 3 guy, and he's had a really nice career, but he has regressed, and he's right in line with this type, this Jordan Lewis, Jarrian Jones, like inside out hybrid type, as further depth. Sure. Christian Braswell's played a little bit. It's been very up and down. Probably could do worse as a 6th corner, and that's probably your room, and you feel pretty solid with that group. And then your safety duo with Eric Murray and Antonio Johnson. Eric Murray, you probably know what you're getting. Former corner that has switched to safety and kind of gotten incrementally better. I think he actually was looking like he was having a career year last year after getting a decent contract here. He played some decent ball in Houston before that. Just kind of a nice balanced player, plays physical. Those corner instincts will play. Not the most dynamic guy or game-changing safety or anything like that, but should still have some good ball in there despite getting hurt last year, I think he turns 32 this year. He actually already did. He'll be 33 come playoff time, so they know they're going to have to replace him soon, and that's why they've been sprinkling in some third-round picks, I guess you wouldn't call dart throws. Some investments at safety is really what you would say with both Caleb Ransaw and Jalen Husky. Even Rayon Lane was a 6th-round pick last year as well. He's the one of these 3 that has actually gotten on the field for this team. But I think Ransaw and Husky, obviously with the higher draft pedigree and had higher upside as prospects, those are the guys you want to look at first. Very unproven if they have to play right now, but they might get that opportunity if an injury came up. Ransaw, I really didn't like the tape. I understood why he got drafted because he tested like a freak. But even at Tulane against a lower level of competition, I didn't think that speed showed on tape. My take on him is he's really just an RAS merchant, but sometimes these guys can surprise, right? There is a reason teams gamble on those athletic profiles, but that's really all Ransaw was. So he's got a lot to prove. Husky is kind of a counter investment. Like he's a different style of approach. Really not a big guy. Not this crazy tester. I think he ran probably mid 4.5s. Probably could have recalled that like a month ago when we were closer to the draft, but we're getting further and further away from it. But he ran 4.55. Bang. There you go. I did recall it. Don't second guess myself next time. Anyway, the Jags draft got a lot of hate. Husky was kind of like Albert Regis, just like maybe around early, but okay, I'm all right with it. Like I actually liked Husky's tape. He was my number 10 safety with an early day 3 grade. Fun ball skills, like definitely good at reading and reacting on the back end. I think in a split zone safety defense, that's his fit. He doesn't have the true speed to be a pure single high guy. Definitely doesn't have the size to be more of a box guy, but in a true split safety defense, I think he's got a chance. Kind of in the Micah Hyde mold. That's obviously like dream best case scenario, but I didn't hate Jalen Husky. He has to get better as a run defender and a tackler. But you've got like 2 different types of prospects going their own lanes. Let's see if they can work out. And that was pun unintended, because Rayon Lane will go his own lane to see if he can beat these other guys out as the lower drafted guy last in the 2025 draft. A little bit more size, more physical, I would say, than both these 2 guys. Loves to hit, really good special teamer, got on the field a little bit last year. Probably not the coverage potential of Ransaw or skill of a Husky. But definitely 3 different types of prospects. Maybe one of them can emerge as a future Eric Murray successor, and maybe one of these guys can stand out early enough that if you have an injury to one of these safeties, somebody can provide some depth. It's hard to know who, but you have a decent chance with those 3 that somebody can. Now, Antonio Johnson, fun last player to talk about here, because he has some pretty sick upside as well. Somehow went in the 5th round in the 2023 draft, despite having really good tape at Texas A&M, really good combination of length and speed. You know, he played a slot corner role at Texas A&M, despite the fact that he clearly projected as more of a deep safety, just more of a stiff north and south athlete, as opposed to someone you want like manning up slot corners. And there's been times where he's been cast into a slot role here in Jacksonville, and he didn't suck at it. I mean, I thought he was a day 2 prospect that ended up going in the 5th round that year, and we're starting to see a staff unleash him now. And it took him some time to get out there, because it was Murray and Wingard to start the season. Murray goes down week 7, and that's when Antonio Johnson really got his opportunity. And he ends up getting a start basically the next 2 months and shines through. Just super consistent tackler. He had only 1 game all season where he had missed tackles, but he did miss 3 against the Raiders. I didn't go and watch those, admittedly, but perhaps Ashton Ginty does things to people. I don't know necessarily who those were against, but regardless, outside of the Raiders game, he didn't miss a single tackle all season. He ends up, despite only playing 700 total snaps all year, he ends up with 8 passes defended, 5 interceptions. Admittedly, I did go watch his interceptions, and 3 of the 5 kind of fell right into his lap. One was a hilariously stupid throw from a backup quarterback. And one was, I think, against the Jets, a hell of an interception where he reads an out route and ends up winning a contested catch. But, you know, his just ability to track down the ball carrier in space and finish tackles and be that last line of defense is really nice. He clearly has instincts and range as a coverage defender. The fact that he has experience as a slot corner, like, I don't love him in a full-time slot role. I think he's stiffer, but that really plays from a quarters assignment where you're basically doing that from depth. That's invaluable experience. I think his upside is tremendous. Like, top 5 to 10 safety in the NFL type of upside. He's got to go out and prove it and earn it and keep climbing the rankings, but there's really not much holding him back here, especially in a contract year, in a scheme that fits him. Again, I don't want him as a slot corner, and he's a little bit more slender. I don't love him around the box all the time, but this is a true split safety system. It's exactly what his skill set is. So really like that he's heading into the year, like, nobody in front of him. This is his job. Go get it. He could really break out this year, kind of like when Kirby Joseph did, and get a massive contract extension and pair with Travis Hunter to be a pair of like star defenders in this in this secondary. So really fun player to end on. He's not there yet, but really could be a surprising breakout, at least for those that aren't paying the closest of attention to this Jags team. I don't think Jags fans would be overly surprised or say that came out of nowhere if he did that. So where does this Jaguars defense come out as we head into the start of this season? 12th, which I think is fair. Like, really good starting point. They do lose Devin Lloyd, which I'm not overly worried about, but Miller does have to go out and prove it. I think this defense at times felt like a top 10 defense. At times they felt more 15-ish. 12 feels good for me. I think the upside for this defense really does come in that secondary. If they can go from the 13th ranked secondary to be 7th, you're in a really good spot to go from, for me, the 11th ranked pass defense back into that top 10. And then the run defense for me is 15th. And if Ventrell Miller can step up, your linebacker run defense goes from really good to maybe one of the best in the league. That could help you push top 10 as well. Not to mention, we're looking at the coaching rankings from what was a first-year defensive coordinator. So even further to prove from their coaching side of things as well can really solidify this team back in the top 10. This is overall just a super balanced team. Like, the offense was super balanced, the defense super balanced here. I'll go through the special teams real quick too, but they're a very highly ranked special teams based on my formula. DVOA liked them a lot more than PFF for the team grade last year. 5th for DVOA, 21st for PFF. But we know the kicker is awesome in Cam Little. Logan Cook is a very good punter. And Parker Washington helps out their returner grade, especially for the punt returns. Kick returns wasn't so great. We'll see if they have him do both again now that he's more of a bona fide starter, because I'm sure they can find some other guys to do kicks for them. But 3rd for overall special teams. So this is really, I mean, it's not a huge surprise. We're into the top 15 of my power rankings now. But as we look back on my strengths, weaknesses, pivotal factors, team summary page, I think the Jags are the highest floor team we've looked at. They really don't have not just weaknesses, but even the question marks, the list of wild cards and pivotal factors that show up on this chart. It's a very short list. The only thing I put down as a weakness is running back, which it's not like they have no upside in that running back room. That does show up with the wild cards. Could I see Tootin and Rodriguez still being a very functional NFL backfield with an opportunity to prove it here this year? Yes, absolutely. While running back does matter, a reason we make jokes about it not mattering is that it is very findable and developable and replaceable, right? So that showing up as your biggest weakness should not scare you off. And then the remaining wild cards really comes down to 2 players, not even in another entire position group. But obviously Travis Hunter impacts 2 different position groups. So Travis Hunter is the biggest wild card. If he can stay healthy, make a huge impact as a corner, and even help out the group of weapons and help them. We talked about Hunter and Brian Thomas provide the upside for the weapons. We don't see weapons show up as a strength for me quite yet. But if some combination of Travis Hunter as a receiver and, of course, Brian Thomas can hit green lights, we might see weaponry show up with the strengths. And then, Travis Hunter as a corner can help the secondary become a very good unit to a legitimate strength relative to the rest of the league. However, despite really not a whole lot of weaknesses or question marks, the list of strengths is a little more shallow, certainly compared to some upcoming teams and even some teams we've done already. Quarterback is a strength, but it is borderline. The 11th ranked quarterback, I still will call that a strength. But Trevor is probably the cutoff for teams that I will call the quarterback a strength, I think. We'll see if I stick to my word on that. Offensive coaching, absolutely. I said it off the bat, Liam Cohen is probably the best thing this team has going for them last year and was, I would say, the biggest reason they shattered expectations last year. You could argue for defensive coaching as well, certainly. And then I did say linebacker run defense is already a strength and has room to be an elite aspect of this team if Ventrell Miller can surprise people in the way that I think he can. I think it is fun to see this screen and how it can just paint different pictures for different teams. Like we showed the Bucs in our last deep dive, their list of wildcards was like painted all this variance. The variance is much smaller on the Jags, but the upside potentially not as much, although Bucs might end up trading Vita Vea and things could change. But that's a conversation for another day. Let's take a look at the Jaguars schedule now and talk about my final predictions for this team. Obviously, to this point, they've been week 1 power rankings, but what am I actually predicting happens here personally if I have to make a pick on this team? And I did make some changes to this graphic. I've seen some feedback that like the way I've done it in the past gives away a little bit too much in terms of who's coming next if you really pay attention to how I was color coding it. And while that helped calculate like kind of my own version of an over-under on this team based on my own power rankings, I'd rather just look at the Vegas over-under on the team, get rid of some of those spoilers. And I don't think it added that much. I think it took away more than it added. So I'm making some changes here, but anytime I make any changes with these graphics, always do let me know your feedback down below. If you love it, hate it, etc. It's not all that different. We're still looking at the schedule being color coded, seeing where the easier games, where the harder games are. And with this color coding scale, I think it's easier to look at like where the stressful points of the schedule are, which games you can hopefully run away with, et cetera, et cetera. But with the Jags, fascinating schedule. They get Cleveland week 1. And I think with how this sets up, that Cleveland game is really important because the next 5 games, you've got at Denver, you're hosting the defending AFC champs in New England. You got to go to Cincinnati. You got to go to London to play the Eagles. And then you got the Texans coming to town. That's all before your week 7 bye week. So no weird slow starting week 1 for this Jags team. If they slip up against Cleveland, you're at risk of like a 2-4, 1-5 start potentially. Things do lighten up after the bye week though. You do still have games at Baltimore, at Houston, at Chicago, at Dallas in there, but most of your more winnable games come after that bye week. So if this team starts slow, even a 1-5 start, now that's pretty hard to overcome, especially if it was winning week 1 and then losing the next 5 weeks. But especially if they start like 2-4, don't be taking any early victory laps on the Jags having this, regression season after being such a surprising, almost Cinderella team last year. They could easily start 2-4, bounce back and win 4 of those next 5 games, which would leave them at 6-5 heading into the final 6 weeks of the season. So if we get past week 12 and they're 3-8, then we can start to be worried. But definitely a tough start to their season nonetheless. As far as their over-under and how Vegas views them, it is an 8.5 over-under. They are 27-1 to win the Super Bowl, which leaves them 16th to 17th for Super Bowl odds. The league is kind of middling on them, just as I'm kind of right in this range as well. I think any remaining team is a good football team. It doesn't feel like I'm necessarily low on the Jags. I like a lot of the stuff they did. Do I think they win 13 games again? No. I don't think Jags fans should expect that either. But I have their ceiling at 11 wins. I think that's certainly doable. And I think their floor is awesome. I think their floor is 7 wins, especially with the coaching they have. There's just not a lot of weaknesses. But my final prediction on the Jags came right in the middle of that. Call me a coward. Not taking a hard stance really one way or another on this Jags team, going with a 9-win season for this Jags team, which would actually be over on their over-under bet. So that does technically make me a tick higher on them than the market, than consensus, but probably not the prediction Jags fans were dreaming for. Let's just hope that they get closer to that ceiling projection than my actual prediction, because I do think, 10 wins gives you a much better chance at actually making the playoffs than 9 wins. But the Jags are obviously like doing that delicate dance right on the fringe, the second best team in their division. Maybe they can sneak that out if they can edge out the Texans, but good chance they're talking about competing for a wild card, grinding it out after maybe a slower start. And if they start hot, by the way, look the hell out for this Jags team. That means they're really coming. But we'll just have to see where this goes, right? Now, let's finish up with my superlative team awards for the Jaguars. For team MVP, which I do not pick quarterbacks for this award for obvious reasons. It'd be too easy to be the quarterback for pretty much every team. But the Jags do happen to have this player that is going to play two sides of the ball that is a big part of their season, and it's Travis Hunter. And I believe in Travis Hunter. I do. I think he's going to be an awesome corner. I think he's going to make some big plays, even if it's, inconsistent in terms of when it happens. There's going to be some quieter weeks for him, but he's going to make an impact on the offense, and I think a great impact on the defense this year. The easier choice would just be Josh Hines-Allen, who's also incredible, and like the biggest reason that their defense is about top 12 in the league. But I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit and predict a pretty freaking sweet year for Travis Hunter in year 2. But he is also my biggest wild card, right? It's not a guarantee that he makes that big of an impact for a team whose offseason was pretty quiet. If they aren't getting that year 2 breakthrough with what they've invested in Travis Hunter, it's just the nature of the NFL. Like, pretty much every team is getting better on paper. The best way for the Jags to be a better team than they were last year is to get a massive impact from Travis Hunter, which is not a given. So that's why he's such a wild card. Is just a lot of it is just how their offseason played out and how much they're counting on him to be a better team. Breakout offense. This is a fun one. I think it's Chris Rodriguez. I know Jags fans are going to lean towards Byshell Tootin. I'm just calling it like I saw it with his film. I was disappointed, honestly, with what I watched in Byshell Tootin. Was the opposite reaction when I watched Chris Rodriguez. I think this is going to be a really fun addition. And I'll also just say he is my fantasy MVP. You don't have to spend a lot to get Chris Rodriguez. Is currently the 56th running back getting drafted, 44th in PPR, which doesn't make sense why he's higher in PPR than he is in standard because he's not really the receiving guy. Anyway, I'm buying Chris Rodriguez here. I am. And then breakout defense, I think you could probably guess that I'm going to go with actually Ventrell Miller. You might have guessed Travis Hunter showed up again, and I thought about Hunter as well, but maybe to mix it up a little bit, Ventrell Miller, for all the reasons I described, I think can really fill the shoes pretty nicely of Devin Lloyd. Not all the way, not having a whole pro season and all that, but I think they can be just fine there. And then unsung hero, I am going to go with Brenton Strange. And part of this is I underrated him as a prospect. He has really deserved credit as, at this point, someone, how high do you have to go to satisfy Jags fans? I think Brenton Strange still has a decent left still to prove, but pushing top 10 for tight ends, especially because he is a really nice blocker on top of just being a really smooth, steady receiving target. And I think, the fact that he does block gets swept under the rug a little bit when we want to focus on the receiving production and all that stuff. But just being an underrated player overall was why I went with him as the unsung hero for the Jags. And by the way, we saw this offense with and without him was very different. So that's my final superlative pick, and that is our Jaguars deep dive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below if you think I missed anything, if you think I was wrong about anything I said. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments. Let me know who you think comes in with the number 14 spot in these power rankings. There are no bad teams remaining. Like, every team at this point is not just in the playoff picture, but I think especially as we go to our number 14 team, we will see the opening up of even another tier in these power rankings where it's like, it's go time. Like, let's see these teams not just make the playoffs, but go beyond that, win a playoff game or more. So getting into exciting territory. The series has been great so far. Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Again, get yourself a hat if it's not sold out already. Really appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you soon for the next deep dive. Cheers.